Welcome to Japanese Sleep Whispers, your sanctuary for peaceful nights and gentle dreams. Here, you will find calming bedtime stories inspired by the timeless beauty and traditions of Japan. Each story is read slowly in a soothing voice, accompanied by natural sounds such as flowing rivers and the tranquil rhythm of shishi-odoshi. Whether you seek relaxation, relief from stress, or help falling asleep, these tales invite you to drift away into a world of serenity. Imagine quiet temples, moonlit gardens, and the whispering bamboo forests as you listen. If you'd like these soothing stories to be part of your nightly routine, consider subscribing so they're always with you when you need them. Subscribe and let these stories be your nightly ritual of calm and rest. Thank you for being here. May you always find peace in every moment. Summer wind on a shoji door. Prologue: the whisper beyond the shoji. Summer in the old town of Hoshikawa had a way of arriving without ever raising its voice. It did not rush in with heat or bright parades of sunlight. Instead, it drifted quietly through narrow streets, slid over stone bridges, and finally settled beneath the wide eaves of wooden houses that had stood for generations. Inside one such house old enough that the cedar beams carried the scent of distant years, there lived a young woman named Miyori. Her home rested at the edge of the town, where houses gave way to a slope of tall grasses and orderly rows of tea fields that shimmered whenever the wind moved through them. The house had a distinction that made it beloved by travelers and neighbors alike. Its shoji doors were famous. The lattice work was delicate, shaped by a craftsman whose name had long been forgotten. And the paper panels were replaced every spring by an elderly artisan who treated the task like a sacred ritual. When sunlight hit them, they glowed softly, like lanterns floating on still water. And when the night wind slipped into the valley, the shoji would sway almost imperceptibly, as though breathing. For Miyori, that sound, the faint rustle of paper moved by wind, was the sound of home. Every summer night, before drifting into sleep, she would lie on her futon and gaze at the shoji sliding door that separated her room from the garden veranda. The shadows of bamboo leaves would dance lightly across the surface, and the warm breeze would carry in the scent of river water and night-blooming flowers. But on this particular evening, as twilight faded into the gentlest shade of blue, she noticed something unusual. The wind seemed to be calling her name. Not loudly, not even clearly, but with a softness that settled on the air like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Miyori. She sat up slowly, unsure if she had imagined it. Perhaps it was the result of long hours spent organizing old scrolls for the small museum where she worked. Or perhaps it was the trick of a mind already half asleep. Yet the whisper came again, this time not from beyond the shoji, but within it, as though the paper screen itself were breathing words stitched from summer air. Stillness followed. Only the river murmured in the distance, and the soft creak of the wooden frame responded as the wind eased its pressure. Miyori rose, sliding open the shoji with a familiar motion. The cool night greeted her. The sky was a deep indigo, with stars scattered like grains of rice spilled from a celestial ladle. Beyond the veranda, the garden glowed faintly. Paper lanterns hung from the eaves, swaying gently, though none had been lit. Fireflies drifted among the grasses, their tiny lights appearing and disappearing like wandering thoughts. Strange, Miyori whispered. She stepped out onto the veranda, her bare feet touching the cool wood. The wind moved past her like a slow exhale, lifting the edges of her yukata. For a moment, it felt as if the entire garden were waiting, listening. Then she heard it again. Not a voice, but a song. It was soft and fragile, like something that belonged to an old memory. A summer wind brushes the shoji door, carrying stories from far before. Miyori froze. She knew that song. Her grandmother used to hum it while folding freshly dried linens, her fingers moving in careful rhythm. It was a lullaby said to have been handed down by the town's earliest residents, a tune that guided wandering spirits back to the warmth of home. Miyori had not heard it since childhood. But now it floated through the air with unmistakable clarity, woven into the very breeze that played with the garden leaves. Slowly, she followed the sound. The path took her past the stone lantern, past the umbrella pine that had stood longer than any living resident, and toward the small wooden gate that opened onto the slope of tea fields. The gate was slightly ajar. She did not remember leaving it open. When she pushed it gently, the hinges gave a sigh that sounded eerily like the last note of the lullaby. Beyond the gate, a narrow footpath wound down the slope and disappeared into the silver darkness of the fields. The wind gathered again. Not strong, just enough to stir the thin fabric of her sleeves. It carried the scent of tea leaves warmed by the day's sun, mingling with the cool breath of evening. And then she saw it. A faint shimmer. A shape. Almost like a figure formed of firefly light, standing among the tea bushes. It did not move. It did not speak. It simply watched her with the quiet patience of something that had waited far too long. Her heartbeat quickened, but she felt no fear. Only a strange, gentle curiosity. "Hello?" she called softly. The figure bowed gracefully, as though greeting someone familiar, and dissolved into the wind, leaving behind only the faint glimmer of drifting particles that clung to the darkness like traces of a dream. Miyori blinked. Had she imagined it? Was it no more than moonlight catching dew? A trick of tired eyes? She placed a hand over her chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. The lullaby had faded, but the last whisper of its melody still lingered in the air. A warm thought drifted into her mind, one she could not explain. Something is returning, something old and gentle, and it needs you to find it. The wind brushed past her again, circling her like an affectionate spirit before gliding back toward the house. The shoji doors, illuminated faintly from within by a paper lamp, looked almost like glowing sails ready to carry her someplace far beyond the familiar world. She stood for a long moment, listening to the night, before finally turning back toward her home. As she slid the shoji door closed, the paper panel fluttered once softly like a wave bidding her good night. Miyori lay down again on her futon, her mind drifting like a leaf carried by a calm stream. Outside, the summer wind continued its gentle wandering. Through the bamboo, across the fields, along the roofs of sleeping houses. And every so often, it breathed quietly against the shoji door, as though whispering a story waiting to unfold. Chapter 1: The Garden Where Dreams Linger. Morning in Hoshikawa arrived gently, as though it were still half dreaming. Light filtered through the shoji with the softness of brushed silk, turning Miyori's room into a quiet chamber of pale gold. For a moment, she lay still, not entirely certain whether she had woken from sleep or into it. The memory of the night before drifted through her mind in fragments: the whispering wind, the old lullaby, the shimmering figure in the tea fields. She exhaled slowly. Maybe it was just a dream. Her voice was barely above a breath, yet the words seemed to linger in the air, refusing to settle. She sat up and slid the shoji door open. Cool morning air slipped inside, carrying the scent of dew and early sun on the garden stones. Birds were already awake, hopping among the bamboo, their wings flickering like little strokes of watercolor. Everything looked normal, ordinary, peaceful, but something in the atmosphere felt different, as if the garden had been lightly stirred by unseen hands. The stone lantern seemed a shade brighter. The leaves of the umbrella pine shimmered more vividly, and the air carried a faint, almost musical pulse so soft she wondered if she was only imagining it. She stepped outside. Her bare feet touched the smooth wood of the veranda, still cool from the night. A faint breeze brushed her cheek, as if greeting her with familiarity. Miyori glanced toward the gate at the far end of the garden. Closed. She blinked. I thought I left it open. But there it was, shut tightly, its wooden latch resting in place. A shiver of confusion threaded through her thoughts. Had she dreamed the open gate? Had she truly walked out into the tea fields? Had she really spoken to a figure woven from light? Her mind tugged at the memories, but they slipped like water through her fingers. Perhaps the night wind had simply played tricks on her. She went to the kitchen, prepared tea, and carried the cup back to the veranda. The moment she sat down, the wind stirred again softly, sending ripples through the surface of her tea. Almost like a reply, Miyori held the cup still, watching the tiny waves settle. "Are you trying to tell me something?" she murmured, feeling slightly foolish speaking to the breeze. But the wind eased, brushing faintly against her hair, and she could have sworn she felt warmth in it and emotion without a voice. A gentle contentment, as if it were confirming something. Later, Miyori walked into town. Hoshikawa was lively in the morning, but never hurried. Vendors arranged vegetables on low wooden tables, greeting each other with quiet familiarity. A group of schoolchildren crossed the bridge with satchels bouncing at their sides. And elderly neighbors sat beneath the shade of a shrine's gate, chatting as if time itself paused to listen. As she made her way through the main street, she noticed an old woman sweeping the path outside a pottery shop. It was old Hanami, a longtime friend of Miyori's grandmother. Hanami looked up, her wrinkled face brightening. "Miyori-chan. Out early today. Good morning, Hanami-san. You look thoughtful," the old woman said, leaning on her broom. "Dreams troubling you?" Miyori blinked. "Why do you say that?" Hanami chuckled softly. "When I was your age, I wore that same expression. Eyes halfway in this world, halfway in another." Miyori smiled politely, but something in the old woman's words struck her more deeply than expected. "Halfway in another world." Hanami tilted her head. "Did you hear the summer wind sing last night?" Her breath caught. "What?" "The wind." Hanami lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "Sometimes, at the beginning of the season, it carries old songs. Songs from before our grandparents' grandparents were born." Miyori's heart gave a quiet, startled flutter. She tried to sound casual. "Is that normal? In this town?" "Oh yes." Hanami straightened her back. Hoshikawa is a place where memories cling a little tighter than in other places. Even the wind remembers things. Miyori hesitated. "What kind of things?" Hanami's eyes softened. "Stories of those who loved this land. Stories of those who protected it. stories of those who never quite left. A drifting silence followed. The breeze moved between them as if listening. Miyuri could not stop herself. "Hanami-san, have you ever seen something in the tea fields? Something like a figure of light?" Hanami's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, sharpening just slightly, with recognition. "Many years ago," she said slowly, "I thought I saw someone walking there at dusk. Someone who moved like a memory walking through the world." Miyuri swallowed. "Was it dangerous?" Hanami smiled gently. "No, child. The old spirits of Hoshikawa are kind. They do not linger to harm us. They linger because they are still holding on to something precious." Another breeze passed by, warmer than before. As if nodding, Hanami looked toward the distant hills. "It seems," she murmured, "that this summer will be a special one." Miyuri felt a tremor of anticipation move through her chest. Special. The word lingered like a soft bell. By afternoon, Miyuri had reached the small museum where she worked. The building was an old Kura warehouse, restored with modern touches but still keeping its thick white walls and wooden beams. It held maps, scrolls, pottery, and fragments of local tales that had been collected over centuries. The Hoshikawa Folk Museum was rarely busy, and today was no exception. Only a few visitors wandered between the displays, mostly tourists curious about the town's ancient tea-growing heritage or the quiet beauty of its seasonal festivals. Miyuri settled behind the reception desk, greeting guests with her usual soft manner. But her thoughts kept drifting to the garden, to the gate, to the shimmering figure, to the lullaby carried by the wind. Her fingertips traced the edge of her notebook absent-mindedly. She had written research notes earlier that week, records of old folk tales from the region, but now her pen hovered, uncertain, as if waiting for something unseen to guide it. After a moment of hesitation, she wrote quietly, "Last night I heard the summer wind sing." She stared at the words, feeling a strange warmth bloom in her chest. Then she continued, "And I saw someone, or something, not human, but not frightening, made of light. Was it a memory? A spirit? A dream?" She paused, tapping the pen lightly. The museum was silent except for the distant chirping of cicadas outside. Her pen moved again. "I don't know what it was. But I feel like it was asking me to find something." The sentence left her hands tingling like a faint current of energy moving through her. Outside, a sudden breeze passed by the open window. It brushed against her notebook pages, turning them slightly. Almost purposefully, she lifted her head. "Hello again," she whispered without entirely meaning to. The wind faded, as if satisfied with being acknowledged. Miyori let out a slow breath. "That's ridiculous," she told herself gently, smiling at her own imagination. But no matter how she tried to reason it away, the sense of connection remained a quiet thread linking her heart to the moving air. When evening came, she walked home along the river path. The sky glowed orange, then pink, then the soft lavender of approaching night. The sound of water slipping over the stones filled the air with tranquil rhythm. Willow branches swayed. Lanterns hanging from riverside shops lit one by one, throwing golden reflections across the surface of the flow. Miyori felt calm. But she also felt watched, not in a threatening way, but as if the world had gently turned its gaze toward her, waiting for her to notice something important. When she reached her house, the shoji glowed warmly against the deepening dusk. The garden was wrapped in a soft hush. As she stepped onto the veranda, the wind stirred again, this time more distinctly, circling her like an affectionate animal. It whispered through the bamboo leaves. It brushed her cheek. It rippled across the surface of the garden pond. And then it moved toward the shoji door, the very same door that had whispered to her the night before. The paper trembled, not from any sudden gust, but with a subtle, rhythmic motion. Almost like breathing. Miyori stood still, listening. A faint hum drifted from the paper. Not a song, not a voice, but the beginning of something. The beginning of a story. A warmth blossomed in her chest. Without thinking, she whispered, "I'm here. If you want to tell me something, I'm listening." The wind softened, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. And in that moment, Miyori felt the unshakable certainty that whatever had begun last night was still unfolding, drawing her, quietly, into a world just beneath the surface of her own. A world where the wind remembered, where shoji doors breathed, where old songs carried forgotten wishes, and where dreams lingered, waiting patiently for someone who could finally hear them. Chapter 2: The Memory Hidden in the Breeze. Night embraced Hoshikawa once more, wrapping the town in a velvet quiet. Crickets sang softly in the tall grasses, and fireflies drifted lazily beneath the eaves, their pale light rising and falling like slow breaths. Miyori sat on the veranda, watching the garden settle into its nocturnal calm. She had changed into a light cotton yukata, her hair loosely tied, her posture relaxed yet alert, as if she were waiting for a guest she could neither see nor name. And perhaps, in a way, she was. The wind had been patient with her all day. It had brushed her sleeve, turned her notebook pages, and stirred the bamboo leaves whenever her thoughts drifted toward last night's events. Now, as she sat alone in the cool evening air, the breeze returned slow and warm, like a familiar friend approaching from behind. It moved gently through the garden, circling the old stone lantern, the stepping stones, the cluster of lavender bushes that always bloomed too early. Then it slipped across the veranda and touched Miyori's cheek. She closed her eyes. "I'm listening," she whispered again, almost without thinking. For a moment, nothing happened. The only sounds were the river murmuring in the distance and the occasional flutter of a night moth. But then, the wind deepened. Not in force, but in presence. It carried with it a subtle resonance, a faint thread of emotion that brushed the edges of Miyori's consciousness. The sensation was tender, longing, old. She opened her eyes. Before her, the shoji door shifted. Not from the wind alone. It trembled softly like water disturbed by a drop. The paper seemed to glow faintly, as though illuminated from behind by a lantern she had not lit. Miyori leaned forward. "Are you trying to show me something?" The glow strengthened for a heartbeat, then faded, leaving behind only the memory of warmth in the air. A gentle tug brushed her mind. Not a command, not even a request. More like an invitation. She stood slowly and slid the shoji open. A hush fell over the garden. The wind stilled, as if waiting for her to step beyond the threshold. She did. Bare feet touching the cool earth, she approached the small wooden gate at the far end of the garden, the very gate she had found open the night before. Tonight, it was half closed. Not by accident. Not fully shut, not fully open. Waiting. Miyori placed her hand on the wooden surface. "Is this where you want me to go?" The wind stirred, lifting her sleeve in gentle affirmation. She pushed the gate open. Beyond it lay the slope of tea fields, bathed in moonlight. The leaves glowed silver, and the narrow path cutting between them looked like a ribbon laid carefully across the earth. Miyori stepped forward. As her foot touched the path, the breeze swept past her, guiding her down the gentle slope. The tea fields at night had always been serene, but tonight they felt almost alive. The plants rustled softly, a sound too delicate to be random. It was rhythmic, coordinated, almost like a whisper spoken by thousands of leaves at once. As she walked, fireflies rose from between the bushes, forming small clusters of drifting light. They moved as if accompanying her, guarding her, guiding her. Miyori's breath slowed, her heart eased into the cadence of the night. Near the center of the field, the wind curled abruptly and gathered before her. It shimmered not visibly, but perceptibly, like a presence standing in the moon's glow. And then, she saw it. The same shape from the night before. Faint, soft, shimmering like a figure woven from starlight and firefly glow. It did not frighten her. It felt familiar, like meeting someone from a half-forgotten dream. Miyori's voice was quiet. "Who are you?" No answer came, not in words. Instead, the wind brushed against her chest, just above her heart, and a warmth blossomed there. A memory rose from somewhere deep inside her, not her own memory, but one the wind seemed to share with her. A distant voice. A gentle humming. A lullaby. A summer wind brushes the shoji door, carrying stories from far before. Her grandmother. Standing by the veranda, smiling softly as she folded linens. A warm afternoon. A drifting breeze. Miyori swallowed. "You know this song?" The figure shimmered, its outline wavering gently, like a flame responding to her words. The wind moved around her again, lifting strands of her hair, carrying with it a swirl of emotion that pressed lightly against her mind. Sorrow, hope, love, longing. It was overwhelming in its gentleness. Miyori's eyes softened. "Are you searching for someone?" The figure brightened. Subtle, but unmistakable. She took a cautious step closer. "If I can help, will you let me?" The figure bowed slowly, gracefully, and then dissolved into a drifting trail of light that flowed toward the northern ridge. Miyori watched it. The path the light traced was a route she had never taken before, one that led toward the older, abandoned part of the fields. Her voice trembled slightly, though not with fear. "I'll follow you." The ridge was quiet, more secluded than the rest of the fields. Trees clustered more densely here, leaves thick enough to obscure most of the moonlight. But the wind continued forward without hesitation. Miyori followed, brushing aside low branches and stepping carefully over roots that curled like sleeping creatures across the ground. At last, the trees parted. And there, nestled in a small clearing, stood a tiny wooden structure. An old azumaya, a simple open pavilion with a gently curved roof. She had never seen it before. The building looked ancient, its beams softened by time, its floor covered in a thin layer of moss. But as she approached, she felt something warm in the air, a faint, nostalgic vibration. The wind circled her gently, then drifted into the azumaya. Miyori stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the breeze stilled completely. The clearing became silent, expectant. Then, without warning, the air shimmered. Images began to form before her eyes. Not clear ones, but soft impressions, like memories seen through frosted glass. A young woman sitting in the azumaya, playing a wooden flute. Her hair pinned with a silken ribbon. Her expression serene, touched by sunlight. A man standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her with quiet affection. Dressed in old-fashioned hakama, carrying a scroll case at his side. The woman's music drifted through the tea fields. The wind carried it far, carried it lovingly. Miyori's heart tightened. What is this? The wind brushed her cheek, a soft, wistful caress. The memories belonged to someone else. Someone who had lived long before Miyori. Someone who had left an imprint so strong that the wind itself remembered. Slowly, the images faded. The clearing returned to darkness. Miyori stood there, breathing quietly, her chest filled with emotions that were not entirely her own. She lifted her face toward the breeze. "Is this what you wanted to show me?" The wind stirred gently, affirmatively. Miyori's voice grew whisper soft. "That woman, she was precious to you. Wasn't she?" The breeze warmed. Not physically, but emotionally, a pulse of tenderness that touched her heart like a faint echo. And in that moment, she understood. The presence in the wind, the figure woven of light. It was searching, searching for a memory, searching for a connection, searching for someone it once cherished. And somehow, impossibly, it had chosen Miyori to help. She placed her hand over her heart. "I'll help you find her. I promise." The wind responded with a soft, grateful sigh. Then it wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, guiding her back through the trees, across the ridge, and down toward the familiar path that led home. By the time Miyori returned to her garden, the night had deepened. Stars glittered above the rooftops like delicate grains of light scattered across a dark cloth. She stepped onto the veranda and slid the shoji closed. The paper panel trembled once softly as if thanking her. Miyori settled onto her futon, her heart calmer than it had been in years. Outside, the wind drifted through the bamboo, singing its ancient, wordless song. A promise had been made, and somewhere in the night, the presence in the wind listened. Waiting, hoping, remembering, and for the first time in a long, long while, it was no longer alone. Chapter 3 echoes beneath the tea leaves. Morning sunlight poured softly across Miyori's room, filling it with the gentle glow that only early summer light could achieve. It crept over her sleeping form, warmed the quiet air, and illuminated the faint smile resting on her lips. Her dreams had been peaceful, filled with wind, soft voices, and glimmers of old memories that felt like distant lullabies. She woke slowly, stretching beneath her light quilt before sitting up and gazing through the shoji door. The shadows of bamboo leaves swayed across the paper, the shapes shifting with the morning breeze. The same breeze that had guided her last night. the same breeze that carried someone's forgotten love. Miyori pressed a hand lightly to her chest, where the warmth of the encounter still lingered. "Good morning," she whispered to the wind. As if in reply, the shoji trembled gently, so faintly that if she hadn't spoken first, she might have missed the movement entirely. Today, she felt lighter, almost buoyant. The presence in the wind no longer felt like a mystery pressing against her mind, it felt like something familiar and kind. Something that trusted her. She wasn't sure why that mattered so much. But it did. After a simple breakfast, Miyori walked out to the garden, her sandals brushing softly against the stones. The morning air smelled of fresh leaves and moist earth. Birds hopped along the fence, pecking curiously at anything that glittered in the sunlight. Miyori approached the gate leading to the tea fields. It was closed, firmly, almost respectfully, yet she sensed something waiting beyond it. She touched the wooden surface, her fingers brushing over its grain. "You want me to come again tonight, right?" she murmured. The breeze stirred around her ankle, swirling once like a playful child before drifting off into the garden. Taking that as a yes, she let her hand fall and turned back toward the house. Today's work at the museum felt like background noise compared to the soft pull she felt from the fields. The mysterious figure. The remembered woman. The Azumaya is hidden in the ridge. There was a thread connecting these things. A thread she was slowly learning to follow. At the museum, she spent the morning sorting donated artifacts, old pottery fragments, calligraphy pieces, and several bundles of handwritten letters sealed with twine. The letters intrigued her. They were written in elegant brush strokes, faded from time but still graceful. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Miyori carefully untied one bundle and began reading. They were love letters, soft, poetic, filled with metaphors of wind, tea blossoms, and summer skies. As she read, a strange sensation washed over her. These words, this tone, this tenderness. It felt familiar. Not in a literal sense, she had never read them before. But emotionally, as if the wind's presence carried the same quiet longing. One line in particular struck her. "If the wind remembers me, I will return to you by its gentle path." Miyori stared at the sentence for a long moment, her breath catching slightly. Another line followed. "Even if time steals my body, may the breeze carry my heart back to the one I cherish." She whispered the words aloud. They resonated in the museum's stillness like a soft bell. A warmth brushed her cheek. A breeze inside the sealed museum. She turned toward the window. It was open only a crack. "Are these?" she swallowed softly. Are these connected to you? The breeze quieted but did not leave. As if waiting, she ran her fingers lightly over the old ink. If the letters were connected, then perhaps the woman in the Azumaya had written them. Or perhaps the man who watched her had sent them. Or maybe they were shared between two people whose story the wind still remembered. Miyori carefully tied the letters back together. "I'll take care of these," she whispered. The breeze stirred approvingly, brushing her hair like a soft hand. After work, she walked home along the river again. The water shimmered with the glow of the setting sun, ripples catching the orange light like floating ribbons of fire. She took her time, enjoying the way the warm air softened her thoughts. The town's lanterns lit one by one, casting gentle halos on the pathway. When she reached her house, she paused. The shoji door was glowing with pale light from inside, illuminated by the small lamp she had left on. It looked like a warm heartbeat waiting to welcome her. She smiled. "Tonight again," she said quietly. The wind glided past her, carrying a faint note of emotion. Excitement. Gratitude. As if it had been waiting. Night deepened over Hoshikawa. The tea fields shimmered with moonlight and the breathable quiet of summer dusk. Miyori stepped outside in a soft cotton robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She held a single lantern, its warm glow illuminating the garden path. The moment she approached the gate, it swung open on its own. Slowly, smoothly, expectantly, she stepped through. The wind swept ahead of her, sending tiny ripples across the sea of tea leaves. Fireflies drifted around her, small orbs of shimmering gold guiding her along the narrow path. She felt calm, safe, cradled by the night. As she reached the center of the field, the wind gathered again, swirling gently. Then, the shimmering figure appeared, clearer than before, almost human-shaped now, though still faint and luminous. A soft outline of light shifting gently with the breeze. Miyori inhaled softly. "Good evening," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure tilted its head, a distinctly human gesture. Miyori stepped closer. Not too close, but enough to let it know she wasn't afraid. "I read something today," she said softly. "Old letters. Someone wrote about the wind carrying their heart back to the one they loved." The figure brightened slightly. She continued in a tender tone. "Is that what you're doing? Trying to return to someone you love?" A pulse of emotion flowed through the breeze. Sadness, gentle and quiet. But behind it hope. The figure shimmered more brightly, its form wavering, as if struggling to remain visible. Miyori reached out her hand, stopping just short of touching the glowing silhouette. "You don't have to show yourself fully," she whispered. "I'll still listen. I'll still help." The figure steadied. Then the wind pressed gently against her palm, not quite a touch, but close enough that she felt warmth bloom beneath her skin. A connection. A wordless trust. "Thank you," she murmured. The breeze carried a faint flicker of warmth. A response. Then, with the gentleness of a falling petal, the figure began drifting toward the northern ridge, toward the Azumaya hidden in the trees. Miyori followed silently. Tonight, she felt no hesitation. Only quiet purpose. The clearing was waiting for them when they arrived. Moonlight filtered through the branches, dripping onto the moss like liquid silver. The Azumaya's old wood glowed faintly, as if remembering brighter days. The figure hovered near the entrance. Miyori stepped inside, placing her lantern gently on the wooden floor. The wind settled, still, expectant. She closed her eyes. "What do you want to show me tonight?" she whispered. The breeze stirred. Images began forming clearer than before. The young woman in the Azumaya. Her delicate fingers touched the flute. Her face lit with quiet happiness. Then the man, smiling at her with a tenderness that shifted something deep inside Miyori. They spoke. She couldn't hear the words, but she felt them. Warm, soft, full of promise. Then a final image. The woman was waiting alone in the Azumaya. Night after night. Her flute is silent. Her posture is endlessly patient. Waiting for someone who never returned. The memory dissolved. Miyori opened her eyes, her chest aching with a sadness that wasn't hers. She whispered, "Did you leave her behind?" The wind shivered with grief so gentle it felt like a leaf falling on water. Miyori touched her heart. "I'll help you find the rest of the story," she said quietly. "Whatever happened, we'll find it." The breeze wrapped her in a warm, grateful swirl. Then it guided her home. Not hurried, not sorrowful, calm. For the first time since she encountered it, the presence in the wind seemed to rest. Trusting her, waiting for tomorrow. Back at home, Miyori slid the shoji door closed behind her. The paper panel glowed faintly, warmed by the lantern inside. She sat on her futon, feeling the breeze still lingering in the room. It brushed her cheek softly like a hand smoothing a child's hair. She closed her eyes. "Good night," she whispered. The wind gave a final, gentle exhale. And the house grew still. But not empty. The presence in the wind remained close quietly, peacefully as Miyori drifted into sleep. Chapter 4: The Whispering River. Morning arrived slowly in Hoshikawa, as if the sun itself had lingered in the sky just to stretch the quiet of the town. The soft golden light filtered through the shoji, painting Miyori's room with delicate lines of shadow and warmth. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, shimmering like tiny stars caught mid-flight. She woke slowly, her mind still half dreaming of the Azumaya, the shimmering figure, and the letters from long ago. The memory of the wind's gentle touch lingered in her chest like a secret heartbeat. Miyori rose from her futon and stretched, the soft fabric of her yukata brushing her skin. She walked to the veranda, sliding the shoji door open with familiar ease. The garden was calm. Morning dew glistened on the bamboo leaves, on the stone lantern, and on the moss that had grown thick over the stepping stones. The air smelled faintly of river water, tea leaves, and the delicate scent of early summer flowers. The breeze touched her face softly. She smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. The wind seemed to reply, moving through the bamboo leaves like a small laughter, playful and comforting. Today, she felt a quiet anticipation. Her heart tugged gently toward the river. After breakfast, Miyori decided to walk along the riverside path, a route she often took to collect notes for the museum. The river was her favorite place in Hoshikawa. It was calm yet alive, always moving but never rushing, carrying reflections of the sky and nearby trees across its surface like liquid glass. The sunlight caught the surface of the water, turning it into a trail of flickering gold. Dragonflies skimmed above, their wings flashing, and the occasional fish leapt briefly, sending ripples across the surface. Miyori walked slowly, her bare sandals brushing the smooth stones at the river's edge. She carried a small notebook in her hands, jotting down thoughts, fragments of memories, and the occasional poem that seemed to emerge from the wind itself. As she walked, she noticed something unusual. The wind by the river was not still, nor was it random. It carried a soft melody, faint but distinct, like the echo of a flute drifting across the water. She stopped. The breeze turned around her, brushing lightly across her cheeks and arms. It was the same feeling she had experienced near the Azumaya presence, gentle and aware, as if waiting for her to notice. Miyori knelt by the water's edge, watching the currents swirl around the river stones. "Are you here?" she whispered, half to herself, half to the unseen companion she had followed for nights. The melody of the wind strengthened, wrapping around her in a comforting rhythm. It spoke not in words but in the subtle language of emotion, longing, tenderness, and an ancient patience. Her heart softened. "I'll help you," she murmured. "I promise." The breeze responded by curling gently around her, lifting a stray lock of hair, and then guiding her attention downstream, toward a small bend she had rarely explored. The path led her to a place where the river widened, forming a shallow pool surrounded by smooth stones and the roots of willow trees dipping into the water. The sunlight through the leaves danced on the surface, creating a mosaic of shifting patterns. Here, the wind seemed more alive, more purposeful. It brushed against Miyori's cheek like a familiar hand, as if urging her to kneel by the water. She obeyed instinctively. The surface of the river shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not only the sunlight but faint shapes, almost like memories pressed into the water itself. Miyori leaned closer, and there, just beneath the surface, she saw the faint outline of the young woman from the Azumaya, the same gentle expression, the delicate hands poised as if to play a flute. The water reflected her as if holding a memory of the past. Miyori gasped softly, a shiver running through her spine. "Are you still here?" she whispered. The wind swirled around her in reply, lifting the edges of her yukata and rustling the willow leaves. It was guiding her to a story that had been waiting decades to be remembered. The memory in the water shifted slightly. The man appeared now, standing at the riverbank across from the woman. He smiled, holding a small wooden flute in his hands. Their eyes met, though they never truly moved. The scene was frozen in time, yet alive with emotion. Miyori felt the longing, the unfulfilled hopes, the gentle ache of love waiting to be reunited. She touched the water lightly, careful not to disturb the reflection. "I want to help," she whispered. "But I don't know how." The breeze wrapped around her in a soft embrace. It carried a warmth that seemed to seep into her bones, giving her courage. The memory shifted again. This time, she saw the woman waiting in the Azumaya at night, her flute silent, her expression patient yet tinged with sadness. The man did not appear. Miyori's chest tightened. She understood now the figure in the wind was searching for something lost, something left behind long ago. And the river was part of the path. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind. It moved over the water like a thread connecting past and present. The rhythm of the river, the whisper of the trees, and the faint hum of memory all combined into a quiet song. Miyori felt her own heartbeat sync with it. She whispered, "Tell me what I need to do. I'll follow." The wind responded by gathering into a small spiral, shimmering faintly like a ribbon of light. It moved upstream slowly, pausing at each bend, each stone, each ripple. It beckoned her to follow. She rose, lantern in hand, and began walking beside the river. The breeze guided her gently, lifting her hair and brushing her cheeks, always near but never rushing, always patient. The river itself seemed to recognize her, reflecting light differently as she moved, forming patterns that seemed deliberate, meaningful. A soft song drifted faintly from the breeze, just audible, a melody that carried the same tenderness she had felt at the Azumaya. Miyori felt her eyelids grow heavy, but she did not stop. Every step was guided, every motion deliberate. She was walking with the wind, walking with memory, walking with the echo of a love that had waited far too long. As night fell, the river path narrowed and the willow trees grew taller, their branches dipping into the water like fingers pointing the way. Fireflies rose in delicate clusters, their glow reflecting in the river like miniature lanterns floating on the current. The wind wrapped around Miyori one last time, guiding her to a small stone bridge she had never noticed before. It arched gently over the river, the water beneath glimmering with reflections of moonlight and firefly light. On the other side of the bridge, the Azumaya appeared faintly, bathed in soft silver light. Miyori's heart swelled. She knew now where the next chapter of this journey would unfold. The river had whispered its secret. The wind had carried its memory. And she had followed. Stepping onto the bridge, she felt the breeze press lightly against her back, as if pushing her forward with gentle encouragement. She whispered into the night, "I'm here. I'll find it. I'll help." The wind swirled one last time before fading softly into the evening air, leaving her standing on the bridge, calm, ready, and entirely present. The Azumaya awaited, silent yet alive. The memory waited, and the story was ready to continue. Chapter 5, Moonlit Azumaya. The stone bridge felt cool beneath Miyori's sandals as she crossed it, the moonlight painting everything in pale silver. The river below flowed gently, its surface shimmering like a silk ribbon laid out beneath the sky. Fireflies hovered above it, their tiny glow drifting like falling stars caught on a slow descent. The Azumaya waited on the other side, quiet and almost unreal in the moonlight. It looked as though it had been carved from the night itself, soft shadows draped over its wooden beams. Pale reflections dancing across its roof, and the faintest suggestion of warmth lingering in its open interior. Miyori paused before stepping inside. A breeze brushed against her cheek, familiar and reassuring. It felt like a gentle hand on her back, encouraging her to go forward. She took a breath and crossed the threshold. The interior of the Azumaya was exactly as she had remembered from the other night. The wooden floorboards were smooth and slightly cool, and the air carried a faint scent of old cedar. The moonlight filtered through the slats, creating delicate patterns of light and shadow across the walls. But tonight, it felt different. The air hummed faintly, as if holding a memory on the verge of unfolding. Miyori walked to the center and set her lantern down. Though its glow was hardly needed, the moon illuminated the entire space with soft radiance. "I'm here," she whispered. Her voice softened automatically, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something sacred. The wind responded, entering the Azumaya through its open sides and circling her gently. Warm, calm, deliberate. She closed her eyes and let the breeze surround her. The memories returned, not her own, but the ones carried by the wind. A young woman sat at the center of the Azumaya, dressed in a pale summer kimono decorated with subtle patterns of evening mist. Her presence was soft, almost translucent. Her hair fell in long, dark waves, and in her hands, she held a small wooden flute. She wasn't playing it. She simply held it, as if waiting. At the edge of the Azumaya stood a young man, watching her with tender eyes. His gesture was gentle, almost shy, the kind of affection that grows naturally over years of shared seasons. They didn't speak in Miyori's vision. They didn't need to. The wind swayed around them, lifting the woman's hair, brushing the man's sleeves. It moved like a silent witness to their unspoken promises. Then the scene blurred. The man turned toward the path leading back to the town. His shoulders were tense. His gaze lingered on the woman for a long moment, long enough to be a farewell. The vision wavered. The young woman exhaled, long and aching. Then the image dissolved like ripples fading on the river's surface. Miyori opened her eyes. The Azumaya was empty again. Silent. Still. But the air around her felt thick with emotion, a quiet longing that had lingered for decades, maybe longer. She whispered, "You waited for him, didn't you?" The wind crept in gently, brushing her cheek, as if answering yes. Her throat tightened. She could feel the woman's patience, her hope, and her heartbreak. It rested on the air like a fragile fragrance that refused to fade. But why couldn't he return? Miyori murmured. Why did your story stop here? There was no immediate answer. Only the sound of leaves rustling in the distance and the whisper of river water sliding beneath the bridge. Miyori sank to her knees, sitting in the center of the Azumaya. She let the breeze move through her hair and across her shoulders, wrapping her in its gentle presence. "Show me more," she said, not as a demand, but as a plea full of empathy. The lantern next to her flickered. The wind swirled around her in a slow spiral, and the shadows along the walls deepened, as though gathering themselves. Then the next memory began. It started with rain. Not the violent kind, but a soft, persistent summer rain that tapped gently on the shoji and filled the air with the earthy scent of wet soil and fresh leaves. The young woman walked alone along the river bank, holding her kimono sleeves close to her body to keep them from soaking. Her hair clung to her cheeks, and she carried no umbrella. She reached the Azumaya, stepping inside to escape the rain, and waited. She held the flute with both hands. She sat down. And she waited. Hours seemed to pass in the vision. The rain never lifted. The man did not come. And yet she remained, because she believed he would. The memory dissolved again, leaving a faint ache in the air like a sigh that had never been released. Miyori felt her heart tighten. She whispered, "Did he promise to meet you here?" The wind brushed against her left shoulder, soft, affirming. But something happened, she continued. Something that kept him from coming back. The breeze moved again, slower this time, carrying a melancholy so deep it felt ancient. Miyori let silence settle over the Azumaya. Sometimes, silence was the gentlest way to listen. A firefly floated into the Azumaya, its soft glow drifting lazily around her before rising toward the ceiling. The sight somehow eased the weight in her chest. After a while, Miyori stood and stepped toward one of the wooden pillars. She touched the smooth surface lightly with her fingertips. "This place, it was important to both of you," she murmured. Like a promise carried by the wind. She felt the air warm around her, as if the wind agreed. She turned and looked out at the river. The moonlight shimmered across its surface, and the willow branches swayed gently. "Tell me what you want me to find," she whispered. "Tell me how I can help." The breeze entered the Azumaya again, circling her and lifting the edges of her sleeves. It wasn't cold. It wasn't hurried. It was guiding, like a hand reaching out, asking for trust. The lantern flickered brightly, then dimmed. Miyori watched the flame dance, then settle. The wind formed a soft spiral around her lantern, pulling its light outward just enough to illuminate the floor beneath her feet. And there, carved faintly in the wood grains, was something she hadn't seen before. A small symbol. Delicate, intricate, nearly erased by time. It looked like a crest, two overlapping circles with a single petal shape in the center. Miyori knelt to examine it more closely. Her fingers brushed the surface gently. "What is this?" she whispered. The wind stirred, and the lantern flame flickered again, illuminating a second mark, another symbol, carved on a neighboring pillar. Then a third. And suddenly Miyori understood. These were made by him, she murmured. And by her. The breeze swirled softly, warm with recognition. She traced one of the symbols. It's like a hidden trail, she said softly. A path left behind. The wind brushed her cheek again, lighter this time, almost joyful. Miyori stood slowly. She felt her heartbeat lightening, as if clarity was beginning to form. If I follow these, she said, will I find the rest of the story? The breeze answered with a soft rustle of the Azumaya's beams, a sound that felt like a whisper of yes. Outside, the night deepened. The moon hung high, bright and full, casting silver threads across the water. Fireflies drifted along the river banks, their lights blinking in a rhythm that matched the quiet thrum of the breeze. Miyori stepped to the edge of the Azumaya and looked back at the carved symbols. They were faint, almost forgotten. Yet they glowed subtly under the lantern light, guiding her eyes in a specific direction toward the deeper part of the forest that bordered Hoshikawa. She felt no fear, only a calm determination. "All right," she whispered. "I'll follow the path you left behind." The wind wrapped around her like a soft embrace, warm, grateful. She lifted her lantern and stepped off the wooden platform, her sandals touching the cool earth. The fireflies drifted beside her as she began walking toward the trees. Each step brought her deeper into the moonlit forest. The breeze followed, gentle and constant. And somewhere ahead, the rest of the story waited quietly, patiently, just as the wind had waited for decades. Chapter 6: Forest of Quiet Footsteps. The forest welcomed Miyori with a soft hush, as though it had been waiting for her arrival. Moonlight filtered through the leaves in thin silver ribbons, illuminating the narrow path that wound deeper into the trees. The air was cool, laced with the scent of damp earth and fresh moss, and every sound seemed softened by the canopy above her. The lantern in her hand cast a warm golden glow, swaying gently with every step she took. The light mingled with the pale moonlight, creating a dreamlike shimmer on the forest floor. The breeze followed her, never rushing, never pulling, only guiding. Like a friend walking at her side. Miyori paused as she reached a cluster of old cedar trees. Their trunks were thick, their bark textured with deep grooves that caught the lantern light. The wind brushed against the branches overhead, creating a soft murmuring sound that reminded her of a lullaby. On the closest tree trunk, she spotted another faint carving. A familiar symbol, two circles with a petal-shaped marking in the center. She traced it lightly with her fingertips. The wood was smooth from age, but she could feel the intention behind it, the careful strokes of someone who had carved it long ago. "He came this way," she whispered. And she must have known. The breeze stirred softly, swirling around the carved symbol. "Did she follow him?" Miyori murmured. "Just like I'm following you now?" The wind wrapped lightly around her shoulders, warm and bittersweet. She continued walking. The deeper she went, the softer the world became. The sound of the river faded. The distant chirp of night insects mellowed. Even her footsteps grew quiet, cushioned by the blanket of moss covering the ground. It felt as though she were entering the heart of a memory. The breeze moved ahead of her, brushing aside low branches and rustling leaves in a slow, rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. Miyori followed the wind's careful guidance, letting each motion, each sound, settle gently inside her. At a small clearing, she stopped. Moonlight spilled freely here, illuminating a ring of stones half buried in the earth. The stones were arranged deliberately, though time had worn down their edges. Miyori knelt and touched one of the stones. It felt cool, solid, ancient. Was this a meeting place? She whispered. Did they come here together before something changed? The breeze circled her softly, lifting strands of her hair. She closed her eyes. And once again, the memories began to flow. A young man stood in the clearing. He looked troubled, his expression shadowed by worry. In his hands, he held the flute, the same wooden flute she had seen in the visions at the Azumaya and in the river's reflection. The wind brushed through the memory, making the young man's figure shimmer slightly, as though he were made of delicate light. He lifted the flute to his lips. The melody that drifted out was gentle, tender, threaded with longing. It filled the clearing like a prayer, soft, hopeful, incomplete. Miyori felt it deep in her chest. The notes pulsed with something unspoken, something beautiful but aching. Then the vision shifted. The young woman stepped into the clearing, wearing a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her hair fluttered in the breeze, and she carried her own flute, held delicately in both hands. She stopped a few steps away from him. Their eyes met. He lowered his flute. She tried to smile again, but the ache remained. They didn't speak, yet the silence between them felt filled with everything they couldn't say. And then slowly she turned away. The young man reached out as if to call her back. But the wind swallowed his plea. And the vision dissolved. Miyori's breath caught. She opened her eyes. The clearing was empty again, quiet, serene, bathed in silver moonlight. She placed a hand over her heart. The sadness in the memory still lingered in her chest like a soft echo. They loved each other, she whispered. But something pulled them apart. The wind brushed against her cheek, light as a sigh. She stood and looked around the clearing. There on one of the stones was another carving. It was faint, almost invisible under the moss, but she recognized it immediately. This one was slightly different, two circles, but the petal was displaced, leaning toward one side, as if reaching. Miyuri touched it gently. A symbol of longing, she murmured. Of wanting to be close, but not being able to. Her voice grew soft. They kept leaving these marks for each other, didn't they? A trail. A way to stay connected even when fate separated them. The wind swirled warmly around her, like a bittersweet agreement. The forest shifted subtly, the air stirring with a quiet energy. It felt as though the trees themselves were listening. Miyuri lifted her lantern. The breeze brushed her shoulder and began moving again, guiding her to another path leading deeper into the woods. She followed. The path became narrower, bordered by tall ferns and glowing patches of moss that looked almost like stars fallen to the forest floor. The wind hummed softly, blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of unseen night insects. Every step felt weightless. Her mind drifted easily between the present and the memories she had seen, as if she were walking on the boundary between now and then. Eventually, she emerged into a small hollow beneath an enormous ancient tree. Its trunk was wide enough that 10 people might not encircle it fully, and its branches stretched high into the night sky, touching the moonlight. The air here felt sacred. Miyuri inhaled slowly. The scent of the tree reminded her of old temples, calm, grounding, serene. She walked closer. At the base of the tree were 2 sets of carvings. One on the left, one on the right. She knelt before them. The mark on the left was the young woman's delicate lines, careful strokes. The one on the right was the young man's slightly deeper grooves, more decisive. Both marks were the same symbol. 2 circles and a single petal in the center. But here, the petal was complete. Perfect. Together. Miyuri felt her breath tremble. They met here, she whispered. Truly met. This was their place, their promise. The breeze rose softly, wrapping around her like a warm embrace, filled with emotion. She closed her eyes, and this time the wind didn't show her a fragmented vision. It showed a feeling pure and gentle. 2 hearts touching. 2 melodies finding harmony. A promise made beneath this ancient tree, sealed not with words but with the quiet certainty of shared breaths. Miyuri exhaled. Then she opened her eyes and said softly, "What happened to you both? Why did the wind return alone?" The breeze stilled. Quiet. Heavy. as if gathering strength to reveal the truth. She placed a hand on the tree's trunk, sensing the depth of time stored within it. "I'll follow," she whispered. "I'll see it all. Whatever you need to show me, I'll witness it." The wind stirred at last, slow, solemn, grateful. It moved ahead, brushing the leaves of the ancient tree and directing her toward a narrow path that curved behind it. A path even thinner than before. A path few had walked in decades. Miyori lifted her lantern, her heart steady. The forest exhaled softly, as if guiding her onward. And she stepped forward, following the wind into the deeper night toward the truth that had waited for her beneath layers of memory, longing, and silence. Chapter 7: The Path Beneath the Old Pines. The path behind the ancient tree was narrow, so narrow that Miyori wondered if it had once been a walkway at all. Pine needles blanketed the ground in a soft, fragrant carpet, muffling her footsteps and absorbing the lantern's glow. The old pines themselves rose like pillars in a quiet cathedral, their branches weaving a dark canopy pierced by fragments of moonlight. The breeze brushed past her gently, as though reassuring her that she was not alone. She lifted her lantern a little higher. The faint golden light revealed a thin trail, crooked and reluctant, winding deeper between the pines. It felt forgotten, perhaps even abandoned, but not lost, just sleeping, waiting to be walked again. Miyori followed it, her breath calm, her steps slow and steady. The wind moved ahead of her, stirring the pine branches in whispers. After several minutes, she noticed something odd. The pines here grew closer together, almost as if they had leaned inward over the decades to guard whatever lay ahead. Yet between their roots she began to see shapes, small, deliberate marks carved into the wood. Her heart skipped gently. They were the same symbols. The two circles. The delicate petal. Some carvings belonged to the young woman's shy, graceful strokes. Others belonged to the young man, silent but certain, even in the quiet of the forest. A secret language left for each other. Miyori traced the nearest one lightly. She felt the same old tenderness she had sensed before, but now there was something else layered beneath it, an urgency. A need to stay connected even through separation. The breeze curled softly around her fingers, warm and encouraging. "You left this for her," Miyori whispered, "so she wouldn't lose the way." The wind responded with a gentle hum. It sounded like gratitude, or perhaps relief that someone finally understood. The path sloped downward, leading her to a small ravine. The lantern cast long shadows against the roots and rocks, and the moonlight filtered through in thin, wavering beams. At the ravine floor rested a narrow stream, barely more than a ribbon of water weaving between stones. Its gentle trickle created a soothing sound, the kind that quiets the heart and loosens the breath. Miyori knelt beside it for a moment, cupping her hands to touch the cool surface. The water reflected her face and the lantern's glow. But for a fleeting instant, she saw another face layered over her own, a faint silhouette of the young woman, her expression calm but tired. Miyori gasped softly and blinked, and the reflection returned to normal. She lifted her head. The wind swirled subtly over the water. "Are you showing me the places she walked?" Miyori asked. "To remember her? Or to help her find peace?" The breeze brushed against her cheek, soft, aching. "Both," it seemed to say. She rose and crossed the small stream, stepping carefully from stone to stone. On the other side, the forest grew darker. The pines were older here, their trunks twisted with age, their branches heavy. And then she saw it, a fallen pine trunk, lying across the path. On its surface were dozens of carvings, the circles and petals overlapping, repeating, dancing across the wood like a quiet confession written again and again. Miyori's breath trembled. She kneeled before the fallen trunk, her lantern illuminating the softly carved shapes. It looked like both of them had stood here for a long time, leaving mark after mark. One carving was deeper, a little clumsy, clearly the man's hand. Another was gentle, curved, and careful, the woman's. Back and forth, like a conversation in silence. Miyori placed her hand on the trunk. "This is where you waited for him," she whispered to the air. "And this is where he returned to find you gone." The breeze stilled for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then it stirred softly, brushing her hair away from her face with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. "I'll find the end of the trail," she promised. "I'll see what neither of you could say." The wind pressed warm against her back, urging her forward. She stepped over the fallen trunk and continued. The forest narrowed even further, yet the symbols appeared more frequently, now etched into bark, carved lightly into stone. Arranged in clusters on roots that had grown thick over decades. It was a path marked in love. And in longing. Each symbol seemed to whisper, "Here I was. Here I waited. Here I remembered you." Miyori's heart ached gently, but the melancholy felt soothing rather than sharp, like a lullaby sung for someone who has finally fallen asleep. Further along, the path opened into a small space where the moonlight pooled like silver water. Here stood a lone pine tree, smaller than the others, but with a single carved symbol at its base perfectly preserved, protected from weather by a jutting root. Miyori knelt before it. This carving was delicate but confident. The young woman's. She touched it softly. The wood was smooth, cool. She came here, Miyuri whispered. Even after the rain. Even after he didn't return. As if in response, the breeze thickened with a warm, sorrowful pulse. Miyuri closed her eyes. And then the next memory rose. The young woman stood beside this very tree, her kimono damp from the evening dew. She looked tired not from physical strain, but from waiting. From hoping. She sat beneath the pine, hugging her knees gently, and pressed her forehead against them. The flute lay across her lap. The wind in the memory blew softly, lifting strands of her hair. She looked up slowly, painfully, and whispered something too quiet for Miyuri to hear. But she could feel it. Why didn't you come? The memory trembled like a candle flame in a draft. And then it faded. Miyuri felt a small tear slip down her cheek. Not from sadness alone, but from the quiet beauty of it, the devotion, the longing, the hope that refused to die even when everything else fell silent. She wiped the tear with the back of her sleeve. "I won't let your story disappear," she whispered. "I'll see it through." The wind circled her, warm and grateful. She rose again. The final segment of the path was so narrow that branches brushed her shoulders as she walked. The lantern's light flickered across the bark, revealing the last of the symbols carved smaller now, more hurried, as though left in a moment of desperation. And then the forest opened. Miyuri stepped out onto a quiet slope, where the trees thinned and the view stretched over the river far below. The moon reflected on its surface, long and silver. At the slope's edge stood a weathered stone marker, half covered in moss. Her breath caught. There was a symbol carved into the stone. But only one. A single circle. A half-formed petal. Incomplete. "It wasn't finished," Miyuri whispered. The breeze around her grew still. Very still. She set the lantern down beside the stone. Her heartbeat softened. This was the place where something had changed. A turning point. A moment that had sent the wind wandering alone for all these years. She placed her hand on the stone gently. "I understand," she murmured. This is where the story diverged. The wind rose behind her, slow, sorrowful, patient. Miyuri closed her eyes. "Show me," she whispered. "I'm ready to see." The breeze wrapped around her. And the night deepened. Chapter 8. The night the wind waited. The breeze wrapped gently around Miyuri, steady and warm, as if guiding her into the memory with careful hands. The world around her blurred not violently, but like mist softening the edges of a lantern's glow. The forest, the river, the moonlit slope, all of it began to dissolve into a deeper, quieter night. When the image sharpened again, she was standing in the past. The air was thicker, humid with midsummer warmth. The cicadas sang in steady waves from the treetops, and the moon hung lower, swollen with light. Miyori realized she was near the same grassy slope as before, but decades younger. The stone marker wasn't moss-covered yet. The pines around her were straighter, their trunks smooth without the wrinkles of time. And on the path leading up to the slope, footsteps approached. A young man emerged from between the trees, breathless and dust-covered, clutching something tightly in his fist. His hair was disheveled. His clothes were damp with sweat. But his eyes held a fierce determination, shaped by hope and a quiet desperation. The breeze thickened around Miyori, trembling. "That's him," she thought. "The one you waited for." The young man paused to catch his breath, leaning against a pine. He opened his palm. In his hand lay a small wooden flute, simple, delicate, clearly handmade. The moment he saw it, Miyori's heart tightened. He made it for her. But something was wrong. Even from where she stood, Miyori could see the flute had a crack along its side as if it had been dropped, or perhaps damaged during his frantic journey. The young man stared at it with pained regret, his fingers trembling around the broken gift. He whispered something to himself so quiet Miyori could barely hear. "I'll fix it. I'll fix everything." Then he pushed forward again, climbing toward the grassy slope with renewed urgency. The wind beside Miyori grew restless, swirling in slow circles, as if filled with emotions too old and too heavy to name. At the top of the slope, the boy stopped. He looked around, the hope in his eyes flickering uncertainly. She wasn't there. The wind stirred softly, brushing Miyori's shoulder with a sorrowful weight. The young man waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. He paced, hands clenched at his sides. Now and then, he glanced toward the forest, toward the faint path where the pine symbols were carved. She always came that way. He looked down at the flute again, turning it over and over in his hands. "You'll understand," he murmured. "I'll explain everything. Just please come." But the slope remained empty. Gradually, the scene around Miyori shifted. The moon dipped lower. The air cooled. The cicadas quieted. The young man sat on the grass, shoulders slumped, exhaustion finally dragging him downward. He rested the cracked flute on his knee and lowered his head into his hands. Time passed not in seconds but in the slow ache of disappointment. Then, just before the first hint of dawn, something moved. The young man lifted his head sharply. It wasn't her. Only the wind brushed across the grass. A gentle gust. A soft passing. A presence without form. The breeze played with the hem of his sleeve, almost consoling. He whispered to it as if speaking to a friend. "I'm too late, aren't I?" The wind circled him once, tender and apologetic. He closed his eyes. She must have waited and waited. His voice broke. Until she couldn't anymore. The wind pressed against his cheek like a hand. Then the memory trembled again, and the slope dimmed. Miyori found herself standing behind him now, watching as he rose unsteadily. He walked to the stone marker not yet worn, still sharp-edged, and knelt beside it. From behind one of the roots, he pulled out a small carving tool. He held it against the stone, his hand shaking. With slow, uneven strokes, he carved the familiar symbol. A circle, and then the beginning of a petal. But halfway through his hand faltered. The tool dropped to the ground. He pressed his forehead to the stone, shoulders trembling. "I don't know how to finish it without you," he whispered brokenly. "I don't know what it means anymore." The wind blew gently, as if trying to hold him together. But he stayed there for a long time, too long, his sorrow sinking into the stone, into the earth, into the wind itself. The half-carved symbol glowed faintly in the moonlight. Incomplete. Unanswered. The last message he ever left. The memory shifted softly, gently like a dream fading at dawn. Miyori blinked and found herself once again in the present, standing beside the moss-covered stone. Her lantern flickered in the night breeze, steadying her. She exhaled slowly. "I see," she whispered. "That's why you wandered. That's why you never left." The wind drifted close, brushing her cheek with a fragile warmth. "You stayed because the story never finished." The breeze trembled slightly, as if nodding. Miyori laid her hand on the stone marker. The incomplete symbol was faded now, but still their two curved lines, never brought together. She traced them gently. "He tried," she said softly. "Even with the broken flute. Even though he was late." The wind pulsed with a faint ache, stirring the pine needles at her feet. Miyori closed her eyes, letting the forest's quiet settle around her. "What happened to him afterward?" she asked quietly. "You showed me the night he realized she was gone. But you didn't show me what came after." The breeze hesitated a long, uncertain pause. Then it brushed against her shoulders and moved slowly down the path toward the ravine where the stream murmured in the dark. An invitation. "All right," she murmured. "I'll follow." They returned to the ravine, where moonlight shivered on the water's surface. The stream seemed deeper now, darker, almost reflective like glass. The wind curled above it, drawing faint circles on the water, soft, slow spirals that tugged gently at Miyori's breath. A memory waited here, too. Miyori knelt at the water's edge. "Show me," she whispered. The wind gathered, stirring the water into a shimmering sheen. Images emerged. The young man again weeks later, this time walking through the forest with empty eyes. His hair had grown untidy. His clothes hung looser. He walked without a destination, moving only because his heart wouldn't allow him to stay still. He paused at the ravine, staring into the water. In his hand, the broken flute. He knelt, lifted it gently, placed it on a smooth rock beside the stream. Then he whispered, barely audible in the memory, "I hope the wind reaches you. Even if I can't." His voice trembled. "I hope you can still hear me." He closed his eyes. The wind in the memory blew softly, swirling around him, carrying his words away. Then the image dispersed into ripples. Miyori opened her eyes slowly. The real stream continued to murmur, timeless and calm. She breathed out, long and steady. So the wind carried everything he couldn't say. The breeze moved behind her, settling around her shoulders like a shawl of warm dust. She understood now. Not the whole story, but the shape of its heart. The wind had wandered all these years, not just from sorrow, but from devotion, carrying memories, regrets, and unspoken words through forests, past shrines, across summers. A guardian of a love that had never reached its end. She brushed her fingers through the water. "I'll finish it," she whispered. "I'll finish the story they couldn't." The wind tightened around her, grateful, hopeful, trembling with old yearning. She rose. "Take me," she said softly, to where her part of the story ended. The breeze lifted, circling her in a warm spiral. Then it drifted toward the deeper forest beyond the ravine, the place where the young woman's last step waited. Miyori followed, lantern swinging gently at her side. And the night deepened, carrying her into the final truths. Chapter 9, where the last petal fell. The forest grew quieter the deeper Miyori walked. Not simply because the night was still, but because the wind itself moved with a kind of reverence, as though the place they approached was sacred, or fragile, or both. Miyori tightened her grip on the lantern. The glow trembled over the pine trunks, painting shifting lines of gold across the bark. The breeze guided her carefully, never rushing, circling back whenever she paused, as if giving her time to breathe. Eventually, the familiar pines opened into a small clearing. Miyori immediately sensed the difference. The air here was stiller, thicker, filled with a quiet that felt heavy, but not oppressive, more like a lullaby whispered for someone long asleep. She stepped forward. At the clearing's center lay an old stone basin, half filled with rainwater and fallen petals from seasons long past. Moss wrapped around its base like a soft blanket. A single pine branch leaned overhead, its needles brushing the rim gently. The breeze slowed beside her, cautious. "This is it," Miyori murmured. "This is where she came last." The wind curled inward, almost shrinking against itself, as though recalling a moment too tender and too painful. Miyori approached the basin. Inside the shallow water, fragments of the sky reflected faintly, stars bending with every ripple. She knelt and touched the surface lightly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water shimmered. The memory rose not abruptly, but like mist lifting to reveal a hidden path. The young woman appeared. She stepped into the clearing wearing the same soft summer kimono, its colors muted by moonlight. Her sandals were wet from dew, her steps slow but steady. She looked tired, but her posture held quiet dignity. She carried the flute he had carved for her. Except in this memory, the flute was still whole. Miyori felt her breath catch. The young woman approached the stone basin as though greeting an old friend. She knelt at its side, lowering the flute onto her lap. Her fingers traced its smooth surface lovingly. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply sat there, letting the night air embrace her. The wind in the memory circled her, brushing through her hair gently as if promising it would remain, even if he did not. The young woman closed her eyes and whispered something. This time, the sound reached Miyori clearly. I waited as long as I could. Her voice was soft, barely more than breath. But he didn't come. The wind tightened painfully. The young woman pressed her palm over her heart. I know he tried, she whispered. He always did. But, her voice wavered, not from anger, but from acceptance. I think our paths were never meant to meet again in this life. Miyori felt a tremor ripple through her chest. She leaned closer. The young woman lifted the flute. She brought it to her lips. The note that flowed out was soft, so soft it might have been mistaken for part of the wind. But it carried through the trees with a purity that made Miyori's throat ache. A long, slow note. A farewell shaped in breath. Then another. And another. The melody was gentle, unhurried, but undeniably final. Each tone dissolved into the night like petals released into a stream. When the last note faded, the young woman lowered the flute slowly. She looked up at the moon with a faint, serene smile. I hope the wind carries our songs together someday, she whispered. Somewhere beyond this summer. The breeze in the memory swirled desperately around her, as if begging her to wait a little longer. But the young woman rose. She placed the flute gently on the stone basin. Then she turned toward the narrow path that led beyond the clearing, away from the forest, away from the river, away from everything she had shared with him. She walked with steady steps, her silhouette soft against the moonlight. The wind followed her. It tried to brush her sleeve, her hair, her cheek. Tried to hold her. Tried to speak. But she didn't turn back. Not once. The memory flickered, light bending, gently cracking and dissolved. Miyuri blinked. The flute was no longer in the basin. Only ripples remained in the rainwater. The wind beside her was trembling, an ache held for decades, finally allowed to breathe. She didn't stop loving him, Miyuri whispered. She just couldn't keep waiting forever. The breeze lowered, touching the earth as if bowing its head. And you followed her, Miyuri continued gently. You stayed with her all the way to her final steps. A warm pulse answered her, soft, almost grateful. But she couldn't hear you anymore, could she? The wind stilled. Completely. Then it moved again, slow and painful, like a nod given by someone who had never learned to let go. Miyuri stood. She felt the weight of both stories now, their longing, their missed moments, their hopes carried quietly through summers long gone. And she felt something else. A question. Wind, she whispered, why show me all of this? The breeze gathered, circling her once, twice. Then it drifted to the edge of the clearing. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of pine roots, lay something small and pale. Miyuri knelt and brushed away the needles. Her breath caught. It was the flute. The same one the young man had placed by the ravine, cracked, weathered, softened by time. Except now, the crack had been gently filled with resin from the pine trees. A quiet repair. Not perfect, but tender. As if someone or something had tried for years to mend it. Miyuri lifted it gently into her hands. The breeze fluttered anxiously around her. You want me to play it? She asked softly. The wind surged yes. But I can't play like she did. The breeze steadied, warm and unwavering. It doesn't need to be perfect, it seemed to say. It only needs to be heard. Miyuri raised the flute to her lips. She inhaled. And then she played. The first note was frail, almost shy. But the wind caught it and carried it gently, weaving it through the clearing. The second note was clearer. The third steadier. Soon, a soft, simple melody drifted through the night, shaped by Miyuri's breath, guided by the wind's embrace. She wasn't playing the young woman's farewell. She was playing something new. A bridge. A call. A message was carried to two souls who had never finished their final words. When the last note faded, the forest held its breath. Then the wind rose, not sorrowful, not wandering, free. It spiraled upward, swirling around Miyori with a warmth so deep she felt tears slip down her cheeks. The breeze brushed them away tenderly. And then it drifted toward the edge of the clearing. Toward the river. Toward the slope. Toward the unfinished story. Inviting her to follow. Because now only one thing remained. To finish the symbol carved into stone. Chapter 10 The Summer Wind's Rest. The wind drifted ahead of Miyori, weaving through the pines with a gentleness she had not felt before. There was no urgency in its movement, now only a quiet, steady purpose. As though leading her along a path it had walked 1,000 times, but this time with hope instead of sorrow. Miyori followed, lantern held carefully in her hands. Its soft glow cast long lines through the forest, illuminating every pine root, every fallen needle, every memory tucked between the shadows. The flute she had played rested safely in her sleeve. As she walked, she noticed something new. The forest was beginning to lighten. Not from dawn, for the night remained deep and full, but from the wind itself, which shimmered faintly, like mist touched by moonlight. Its presence was no longer invisible. It had become something she could almost see, almost touch. A companion walking beside her. "Are you feeling lighter?" Miyori asked softly. The breeze pulsed sweet, warm. She smiled. Good. They returned to the riverbank first. The water shimmered under the moon, gentle waves carrying reflections of pine branches overhead. The moss-covered stones glowed faintly, and the air smelled of a clean summer night. The wind circled her once, then drifted to the place where the young man had once left the broken flute. Miyori knelt. The smooth rock still held faint grooves from where the flute had rested all those years ago. The memory of him lingered here, quiet, earnest, aching. She set the flute down gently atop the rock. The wind brushed over it tenderly, almost like a parent smoothing the blanket of a sleeping child. Miyori whispered. He wanted her to hear him even when he couldn't find her. The wind answered with a soft spiral. "And now she has heard," Miyori said. The breeze shimmered the faintest glow, the smallest thanks. Next, they ascended the slope. The lantern's glow trembled as they climbed, though Miyori sensed it wasn't from exhaustion hers or the lantern's, but from the breathless anticipation hovering in the air. At the top, the moss-covered stone marker waited. The incomplete symbol carved by the young man remained exactly as before, two lines curved toward each other, reaching, hoping, never touching. Miyori approached it and knelt slowly. The wind hovered close, almost vibrating. She touched the unfinished petal with her fingertips. The stone felt cool, steady. He couldn't finish it because he didn't know how their story ended, she murmured. And she couldn't finish it because she walked another path. The breeze brushed her cheek, acknowledgement, sorrow, and gratitude all mingled together. Miyori took a slow breath. "Will you show me what you want it to mean now?" The wind stirred. Gently, it pressed itself against her hand, guiding it toward the stone. Her fingers tingled with warmth. It wasn't telling her what shape to carve. It wasn't commanding. It was asking. Together, a symbol formed not from the sadness of the past, but the soft acceptance of the present. Miyori took her small carving tool from her sleeve. She pressed its tip to the stone. The wind steadied her hand, not controlling, only supporting. She began to carve. A slow, curved line extended from the half-formed petal. Smooth, steady. Then another. Together they shaped a single delicate bloom, a full flower, simple and complete. A circle at the center. 4 petals around it. Balanced. Gentle. Whole. When she finished, she withdrew the tool and brushed away the thin dust. The wind trembled, warm, bright, lifting in soft spirals. Miyori whispered, "It's finished." A pulse of warmth washed over her. The symbol glowed faintly under the moonlight. Though she knew it was not really glowing, it was simply the wind's joy illuminating her vision. She stayed kneeling, letting the moment settle. Then she asked quietly, "What happens now?" The wind shifted behind her. At first, it was a soft breeze. Then it thickened, forming a gentle current wrapping around her shoulders. Then another, circling her waist. Then another, rising behind her like an embrace. Warm, steady, complete. It felt like a long-awaited sigh. A release. A homecoming. Miyori's breath hitched. "You're leaving?" The breeze answered by brushing her hair, careful and tender. Not leaving her, but leaving the wandering, leaving the sorrow, becoming itself again, becoming the wind. She stood slowly. The breeze rose, gathering around her. It lifted pine needles into a soft spiral, stirred the branches, swirled the lantern flame without extinguishing it. And then, a soft, melodic hum filled the clearing. Not from Miyori, not from the forest, from the wind itself. A sound like a flute note carried through the summer air. A sound like a final message from 2 hearts who had waited too long. A sound like gratitude. Miyori closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me." The wind brushed her cheek one last time. A farewell that did not feel like an ending. Then it lifted, rising high into the air. Scattering through the pine branches, slipping between leaves, weaving into the night sky, stretching across the river, the forest, the mountains. Becoming everywhere. Becoming free. Miyori stood alone on the slope. But the loneliness felt gentle, soft, like the end of a lullaby. She picked up the lantern and began walking back through the forest at an easy pace. Along the way, she noticed something she hadn't before. The path seemed clearer now. The air is lighter. The trees are calmer. The symbols carved into the pines still whispered their story, but no longer with grief. They simply existed, as memories do, bright and warm. By the time she reached the old shrine where she had first felt the summer wind's touch, the night was beginning to fade. She placed her hand on the wooden frame of the shoji door, feeling the cool grain beneath her palm. The breeze fluttered through the faintest whisper. Not a cry for help. Not a lingering sadness. Just a summer wind greeted her. Alive. Happy. Free. Miyori smiled. "Good night," she whispered. Or perhaps, "Good morning." She slid open the shoji door and stepped inside as the horizon began to pale. And somewhere outside, in the soft blue of dawn, the wind carried a final note across the forest. Light, warm, and whole. A story at rest. Lanterns floating on Lake Biwa. Prologue: the night of floating lights. The evening sky over Lake Biwa was soft and quiet, painted with the fading colors of sunset. The water reflected the last streaks of gold and rose, stretching endlessly like a mirror. Small ripples moved gently across the surface, whispering against the shore. Lanterns, delicate and glowing, floated on the lake. Each one carried a wish, a memory, or a silent prayer, drifting slowly as if guided by invisible hands. The warm candlelight trembled in the soft wind, creating tiny rivers of gold across the dark water. A young girl named Aiko stood at the edge of the lake, holding a lantern in her hands. Her kimono was light blue, decorated with faint patterns of lotus flowers, and the breeze brushed her hair across her cheek. She watched the lanterns drift away, carrying wishes into the night. "May everyone find peace tonight," she whispered, releasing her lantern. It floated gently into the others, joining them in their slow journey across the lake. The wind murmured through the reeds, as though answering her wish. And for a moment, the world felt infinite and calm, suspended between the water and the sky. Chapter 1: Whispers of the Lake. The moon rose slowly, silver and round, casting its glow over the tranquil waters of Lake Biwa. The soft chirping of crickets filled the night, mingling with the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Aiko walked along the lakeside, her bare feet brushing the cool sand, each step light and unhurried. She had always come to the lake at night, when the world was quiet and the lanterns floated freely. The lake seemed to listen to her thoughts, answering not with words but with the gentle swaying of the water and the soft rustling of reeds. Tonight, the lake felt different. The air was warmer, the wind carrying the faint scent of lotus blossoms from the distant ponds. Aiko paused near a small wooden dock. The lanterns, glowing softly, seemed closer tonight, as if inviting her to join them on the water. She knelt and placed her own lantern gently on the dock. Its light reflected in the water, merging with the other floating lights. The lantern seemed to hesitate for a moment, then slowly drifted away, joining the others in a quiet procession across the lake. Aiko closed her eyes. She could hear the whispers of the night, the soft sigh of the wind, the faint ripple of water, and the gentle hum of countless lanterns drifting silently together. She opened her eyes and looked at the lake. Each lantern seemed to carry not only her wish, but the dreams and hopes of those who had come before her. They shimmered like stars fallen onto the surface of the water, each one a small, gentle story, drifting toward a horizon she could not reach. For a long while, she watched the lanterns float, letting their quiet beauty settle into her heart. The world was still. The lake was calm. And for the first time in many days, Aiko felt the serene weight of peace settle over her like a soft blanket. The night carried on, and the lanterns continued their slow journey across the lake. Glowing like tiny moons, whispering promises to the wind, and reminding all who watched that even in the darkest moments, light could drift gently into the world. Chapter 2: The Lantern Maker's Secret. The morning sun rose gently over Lake Biwa, painting the quiet town in warm shades of gold. Mist drifted lazily above the water, moving like soft curtains that revealed and concealed the distant mountains. Aiko walked along the narrow path that led from her home to the marketplace, her sandals making a soft clacking sound on the stone road. The festival of floating lanterns had ended the night before, but traces of it still lingered everywhere, stray bits of paper. The faint scent of roasted chestnuts, and distant laughter that seemed to echo from memories rather than from people. Aiko carried a small basket with her, filled with sheets of handmade washi paper. She was on her way to the workshop of Haru, the old lantern maker who lived near the water's edge. His workshop was known for its delicate crafts, but more than that, for its warmth, like stepping into a quiet dream. When she reached the wooden door, she knocked gently. "Come in," a soft voice called from inside. Aiko slid open the door and stepped into the workshop. The room smelled faintly of ink, cedar, and dried lotus leaves. Lanterns of all shapes and sizes hung from the ceiling, round, square, cylindrical, some shaped like lotus blossoms and others shaped like moons. Their pale paper skins glowed softly as sunlight filtered through the windows. Haru sat at his workbench, his hands moving with steady grace as he folded thin paper. His hair was white like winter frost, and his eyes were warm and kind, reflecting the gentle glow of lanterns around him. "Aiko," he said with a smile. "You've come early today." "I wanted to bring the new paper," she replied, holding out her basket. "Mother finished preparing them last night." Haru lifted a sheet carefully, running his fingers across its smooth surface. "Your mother's paper always feels like a quiet river," he said. "Calm, steady, and full of light." Aiko smiled. "She says the lake water makes it special." "Perhaps," Haru replied. "Or perhaps the hands that make it carry their own kind of magic." He set the paper aside, then gestured for Aiko to sit. She took a seat beside him and watched as he continued folding the frame of a lantern. For a while, there was only the sound of paper being shaped, the soft rustling of reeds outside the window, and the gentle tap of bamboo tools on wood. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that made the heart settle. After some time, Aiko asked quietly, "Haru, do lanterns really carry our wishes?" Haru paused in his work. He placed the half-finished lantern on the table, then turned toward her with a thoughtful expression. "What makes you ask that?" Aiko looked down at her hands, folding a small corner of her kimono sleeve. "Last night when I sent my lantern onto the lake, I felt something." Like the lake whispered back. Haru's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair. "Lake Biwa has listened to many wishes," he said. "For hundreds of years. Some people believe the lanterns carry those wishes into the water, where they drift until the lake itself remembers them." "Remembers them?" Aiko asked, tilting her head. "Yes," Haru replied, "because the lake has a heart. Not like ours, perhaps, but a heart that feels the weight of light and the warmth of prayer." Aiko gazed at the lanterns above her, glowing faintly like stars. "So the lake hears us?" "In its own way," Haru said. "And it answers gently. Always gently." Aiko thought for a moment, then whispered, "Last night it felt like the lake told me everything would be all right." Haru nodded slowly. Then perhaps it did. A breeze drifted in through the open window, making the lanterns sway. Their movements were small, calm, like breaths taken in sleep. Haru reached under the workbench and pulled out a small wooden box. It was old, polished smooth by years of handling. He opened it carefully and revealed a lantern, unlike any Aiko had ever seen. Its frame was made of thin willow branches, but they sparkled faintly, as though moonlight rested upon them. The paper was pale blue, almost translucent, decorated with patterns of shimmering silver waves. Aiko stared in awe. "It's beautiful. This," Haru said quietly, "is a lantern meant only for the lake." "For the lake?" Aiko repeated. "Yes. Some lanterns carry people's wishes, but this kind carries the lake's wishes." Aiko blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "The lake makes wishes?" Haru smiled gently, a faraway look in his eyes. "All living things yearn for something. Even the quietest places hold dreams." Aiko felt her breath slow, her thoughts settling like soft feathers. "What does the lake wish for?" she whispered. Haru looked out the window, toward the shimmering water. "That," he said softly, "is something we will learn together." The lanterns above them swayed again, as if agreeing. And Lake Biwa, glimmering beneath the morning sun, seemed to breathe quietly, waiting, listening, dreaming. Chapter 3: The Lake's Gentle Breath. That evening, long after the sun had dipped behind the distant mountains, Aiko returned to the lakeside. The sky was a deep shade of indigo, and the first stars shimmered like grains of silver scattered across a dark cloth. The lanterns from the night before had long vanished beyond the horizon, yet their warm glow lingered in Aiko's memory. The lake was calm, smoother than silk. It stretched outward in a dark expanse, holding the reflections of the stars like precious jewels. Soft waves brushed against the pebbles on the shore, each one a whisper that soothed the heart. Aiko sat on the old wooden dock, her legs dangling over the side. She leaned back on her hands and took a long, slow breath. The night felt gentle, as if the world were wrapped in a quiet embrace. She thought about Haru's words about lanterns that carried the lake's wishes. Could a place truly hold a dream? Could the water beneath her feet yearn for something unseen? A gentle breeze swept across the lake, brushing her cheeks. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind carried the scent of lotus blossoms and distant pine trees. It carried the soft, rhythmic breath of the water, a sound that had existed long before she was born. The lake exhaled, and the surface shimmered. Aiko opened her eyes. For a moment, she thought she saw something move beneath the surface, a pale glimmer, like moonlight passing through the water. It swayed, slow and graceful, then vanished before she could focus on it. Her heart fluttered. Was that? She murmured to herself. But the lake did not answer, only quiet ripples drifting toward her feet. A rustling sound came from the path behind her. Aiko turned to see Haru approaching, carrying a small cloth-wrapped object. His steps were slow but steady, and the lantern light he held cast a warm glow along the path. "You're out late," Haru said softly as he sat beside her on the dock. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," Aiko replied. "About the lake's wishes." Haru chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "Ah. Curiosity has a gentle way of tugging at the heart." Aiko leaned forward. "Do you really believe the lake dreams?" Haru placed the cloth-wrapped object, clearly the special lantern, between them. "In the old stories," he began, "Lake Biwa was said to be alive. Not in the way we are, with footsteps and voices, but alive in spirit. It listens, it remembers, and sometimes it speaks." Aiko's eyes widened. "How does it speak?" "Through signs," Haru said. "Through the movement of water, through the blooming of lotus flowers, or through light that appears when none should exist." Aiko thought of the shimmering beneath the water moments before. Her breath caught slightly. "Like a glow in the lake?" Haru turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. "Did you see something?" Aiko hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just for a moment." Haru looked out over the dark water. "Then perhaps the lake is ready." "Ready for what?" Haru opened the cloth bundle, revealing the special lantern. Its pale blue paper seemed to catch the faint starlight, glowing softly. The silver wave patterns shimmered like water in motion. "This lantern," Haru said, "is not meant to carry a human wish. It is meant to let the lake speak." Aiko swallowed. "How?" "We place it on the water," Haru replied. "And it will drift where the lake guides it. Wherever it stops, that is where the lake wishes to be heard." Aiko felt a serene weight settle in her chest. The idea was beautiful, mysterious, and somehow comforting. Haru stood, holding the lantern gently. "Would you like to set it afloat?" Aiko rose slowly, her bare feet brushing the cool wood of the dock. She cupped her hands around the lantern as Haru passed it to her. It felt surprisingly light, as though it held more air than paper. The lake stretched before her, shimmering quietly. She knelt at the edge of the dock, lowered the lantern, and touched it to the surface. The light inside flickered softly. The lantern hesitated just for a heartbeat and then began to drift, gliding over the water as if pulled by an unseen current. Aiko and Haru watched in silence. The lantern moved gently, drifting past the reeds, past the wooden beams of the dock, and slowly toward the open expanse of the lake. Its pale blue glow danced across the surface like moonlight caught in motion. After several minutes, the lantern began to slow. Aiko held her breath. The lantern circled once twice, then came to rest near a cluster of water lilies. There, it swayed softly, its light glowing brighter. Haru exhaled, his voice almost a whisper. "The lake has chosen." Aiko looked at the glowing lantern, mesmerized. "What does it mean?" Haru smiled faintly. "It means our journey is just beginning." The lake shimmered once more, and Aiko felt it, that gentle breath, that quiet heartbeat beneath the water. Something ancient and tender was stirring. And it was calling to her. Chapter 4: The Voice Beneath the Water. Night deepened over Lake Biwa, transforming the world into a calm sea of shadows and silver light. The special lantern Haru had crafted remained nestled among the water lilies, glowing faintly like a sleeping firefly. Ripples brushed its sides gently, as though the lake itself were breathing around it. Aiko and Haru stood at the edge of the dock for a long while, simply watching. The lantern's soft blue light moved subtly with each wave, never drifting too far from the lilies, as if held in place by invisible hands. "Why there?" Aiko whispered. Haru's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained peaceful. "That cluster of lilies, it blooms only at night during certain seasons. The villagers call them moon's ears. It's said they listen to the lake." Aiko blinked. "Flowers that listen? Everything listens in its own way," Haru replied. "Even if the sound is too quiet for us to hear." A dragonfly skimmed across the water, its wings catching the moonlight before disappearing into the reeds. Aiko watched the lilies, glowing faintly beneath the lantern's light. Their petals were pale and smooth, and when the breeze brushed them, they swayed gently, almost like they were nodding. "Do you think," Aiko asked softly, "the lake is trying to tell us something?" Haru folded his hands behind his back. "I think the lake has held many voices for a long time. Old stories linger in deep water. Sometimes they rise to the surface when someone is willing to listen." Aiko felt the breeze wrap around her, cool and comforting. She stepped closer to the dock's edge and gazed down into the dark water. It was impossible to see far, only the reflection of the moon and the dim shimmer of the lantern. But as she continued to stare, she thought she saw something. The faintest movement, a swirl, a flicker of pale light beneath the lilies. Her breath caught. Haru looked. Haru stepped beside her, leaning forward slightly. His eyes followed the direction of her gaze. The water beneath the lilies brightened so softly she wondered if she imagined it. The glow was gentle, almost shy. It pulsed once, as tender as a heartbeat. Aiko felt warmth spread in her chest. "It's answering," she whispered. Haru nodded slowly. "Then listen carefully. The surface of the lake smoothed. The ripples quieted. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The world fell into a serene stillness. And then Aiko heard it. A sound softer than a sigh. Softer than a ripple. A murmur, like a memory spoken from long ago. It seemed to rise from the water itself, no words, no clear message, only an emotion carried in the tone. A deep, soothing longing. A gentle sadness wrapped in warmth. Aiko's eyes stung unexpectedly. It feels she paused, searching for the right word. Lonely. Haru closed his eyes. Yes, lakes can be lonely too. Aiko turned to him. What does it want? Haru opened his eyes, meeting hers with a calm understanding. Perhaps it wants to be remembered. Aiko looked back at the water. The lilies swayed softly again, catching the lantern light. The faint glow beneath them pulsed one more time, like a quiet answer. Aiko placed her hand over her heart. I can remember. Haru smiled gently. I know you can. A gentle wave brushed the dock. The moment softened, fading like a sigh carried by the wind. Whatever voice had risen from the depths retreated once more, leaving behind a stillness deeper than before. Aiko took a slow breath. Will it speak again? Yes, Haru replied. When the lake chooses. When it trusts. He paused. When it knows we are ready to hear more. The lantern continued to glow, unwavering, among the lilies. Aiko wrapped her arms around herself not from cold, but from a growing awareness. The lake was not just vast and beautiful. It was alive with emotions as deep as the shifting water. And it had begun to speak to her. Chapter 5: The Keeper of Quiet Shores. The next morning broke with a soft, pale glow, the kind of dawn that seemed to brush the world with a feather-light touch. Mist clung to the lakeside, wrapping the reeds and stones in a dreamy veil. Aiko stepped outside her home and breathed in the cool air. It felt gentler than usual, as if the lake itself had exhaled during the night. After the strange, tender voice she heard beneath the water, her thoughts had moved like slow waves, calm, curious, and full of quiet wonder. As she walked toward Haru's workshop, she found him already outside, sweeping fallen leaves from the wooden steps. His motions were unhurried, each sweep deliberate and soft, like someone ironing the wrinkles out of time. "Good morning, Aiko," he greeted without looking up. "Lake Biwa is calm today." Aiko smiled faintly. "It feels like it slept well." Haru chuckled. "Ah, perhaps it did." She stood beside him for a moment, watching the leaves gather in a small pile. "Haru," she began softly. "The voice we heard last night, will we hear it again?" Haru leaned on the broom handle, gazing at the shimmering lake. Voices from deep water do not appear often. But when they do, it means something old is stirring. Something patient. Aiko lowered her eyes. It sounded lonely. Loneliness, Haru said gently, is not always sadness. Sometimes it is simply the quiet memory of what once was. Aiko looked toward the lake, feeling a tug of emotion she couldn't fully name. Haru continued sweeping. Today, I want to show you something. There is someone we must visit. Someone? Aiko tilted her head. Who? Haru tapped the broom lightly on the ground. An old friend. One who has watched over the lake longer than I have. Aiko blinked. Longer than you? But you've lived here your whole life. And he has lived here for many lifetimes, Haru replied with a soft smile. Aiko's curiosity bloomed quietly. Who is he? Haru set the broom aside. His name is Shinji. People in the village call him the keeper of quiet shores. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. Aiko felt the air shift, the way it does right before a story long hidden chooses to step forward. Come, Haru said, picking up a small satchel. It's time you met him. They followed a narrow path that wound along the lake's edge. The air was filled with the calls of water birds and the tangled melodies of cicadas awakening with the morning sun. Dragonflies flitted across the path like streaks of glass blue light. As they walked, Haru spoke softly. Shinji lives in a hut built near the farthest bend of the lake. Not many people visit him now. But long ago, he was the one who guided travelers, listened to their stories, and carried news between villages. Aiko nodded. He must be very wise. Haru smiled. He is wise in the way old trees are wise, quiet, grounded, and patient. After a short walk, they reached a small clearing where the trees parted to reveal a humble wooden hut nestled between tall reeds. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney, carrying the scent of cedar. Aiko held her breath. The hut seemed part of the land itself, as though it had grown from the soil and water rather than being built. Haru called out softly, "Shinji, it's Haru. I've brought someone." After a moment, the door slid open, and a tall, slender man emerged. His hair was long and silver, tied loosely behind him. His eyes were gentle yet clear, like still water reflecting the sky. Even standing still, he gave off the feeling of a slow-moving river, calm, steady, ancient. He smiled. "Haru, it has been some time." Haru bowed slightly. "Forgive the intrusion." Shinji turned his gaze to Aiko. She felt something stir within her, an odd warmth, as though his eyes could see not only her face but her thoughts, her worries, her quiet dreams. "And who," Shinji asked softly, "is this gentle soul you have brought?" "Aiko," Haru replied. "She heard the lake last night." Shinji's expression shifted subtly, a small lift of the brows, a contemplative silence. Then he gestured toward the hut. "Come." The lake rarely speaks without reason. Inside, the hut smelled of dried pine needles and warm tea. Wind chimes made of shells and tiny stones hung from the ceiling, chiming softly whenever the breeze passed through. Shinji poured tea into 3 small cups and set them on the wooden table. "Sit." Aiko sat, hands folded neatly in her lap. Shinji's presence was calm, almost soothingly heavy, like a warm blanket laid gently over her shoulders. When Haru told him what had happened, the special lantern, the lilies, the soft voice rising from the water, Shinji listened with deep attention, nodding slowly. When the story ended, Shinji looked at Aiko. "Tell me," he said. "What did you feel?" Aiko hesitated. Then, quietly, it felt gentle. And sad. Like someone longing to be heard. Shinji closed his eyes, letting her words sink into the quiet space between them. "The lake remembers many things," he murmured. "Not all of them light. But not all of them are heavy." He opened his eyes again, calm and deep. "Aiko, the lake has chosen to speak to you. That is no small thing." Aiko's breath trembled. "But why me?" Shinji stood and walked to the open window, gazing at the lake sparkling in the distance. "Because," he said softly, "you're willing to listen." Aiko felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with a quiet, warm responsibility she didn't yet understand. Shinji continued, his voice low and smooth as flowing water, "And the lake has more to say. Much more. You must return tonight." Aiko looked at him. "Will the voice come back?" Shinji nodded once, slowly. "Yes. And this time it may show you something." Her heartbeat echoed gently in her ears. Haru placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't be alone." Aiko gazed at the lake through the window, its surface shimmering softly in the morning light. Whatever was awakening beneath the water, it was waiting for her. Chapter 6: Nightfall over the listening lilies. By the time the sun began to set, Lake Biwa shimmered in hues of amber and deep violet. The evening air felt different, charged with a gentle anticipation that Aiko could feel in her chest. She stood at the lakeside with Haru, waiting for Shinji to arrive. The special lantern still rested among the lilies, its soft blue glow faint in the daylight but unmistakably present. The lilies themselves opened slowly as the sky darkened, their pale petals catching the cool light of dusk. They swayed in the breeze like quiet guardians preparing for nightfall. Aiko knelt near the water, touching the cool surface with her fingertips. "It feels warmer today," she murmured. "It knows you're here," Haru replied, his voice as soft as the rippling waves. Aiko felt a small flutter in her heart, half excitement, half gentle fear. "Do you think it will speak again?" "Yes," Haru said, "but how it speaks may not be the same as before." A soft crunch of footsteps on gravel made them turn. Shinji approached with slow, measured steps, carrying a wooden staff adorned with thin ribbons that fluttered like whispers. "A calm night," he said, gazing at the sky. "The kind of night when hidden things feel safe to rise." Aiko stood and bowed politely. Shinji responded with a slight nod, then turned his eyes toward the water, studying the lilies and the lantern among them. "The lake remembers you," he said quietly. "And tonight it may show you a memory." Aiko's breath caught. "A memory?" Shinji stepped forward. "Lakes hold stories. Not in words, but in currents and light, in the shifting of waves. When it chooses to share them, they appear like reflections of forgotten time." Aiko's eyes widened. "Will it show me its past?" "Perhaps," Shinji said. "Or perhaps it will show you something of its heart." He motioned for her to sit on the dock. The wooden planks felt cool beneath her as she settled down, folding her hands in her lap. Haru and Shinji stood close, silent and watchful. As the last traces of sunlight melted into the horizon, the first stars appeared. And with them, a stillness fell over the lake so deep, so complete, that even the insects softened their songs. The lantern glowed brighter. The lilies opened wider. Aiko's heartbeat slowed, syncing with the calm pulse of the water. And then a ripple. Small at first, just a circle expanding gently from beneath the lilies. Aiko leaned forward slightly, breath steady. The water brightened, not with reflected moonlight but from within. A soft, silver glow spread outward, illuminating the lilies from below. The petals shone like delicate porcelain. The special lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied, its blue light merging with the silver shimmer beneath it. Aiko felt something brush her thoughts light as a sigh. She closed her eyes instinctively. The world dimmed. The night deepened. And then she saw it. Not with her eyes, but somewhere deeper a vision rising like a memory long buried under waves. She stood on a shoreline that was both familiar and impossibly ancient. The lake stretched before her, wide and shimmering. But the mountains were different, sharper, taller, untouched by time. The world around her was filled with lanterns. Hundreds, thousands floating across the lake like a river of stars. People lined the shore, their faces peaceful, their eyes full of reverence. Drums sounded softly in the background, slow and gentle, like the beating of a calm heart. Aiko turned, and her breath caught. A young woman stood beside her, wearing a kimono patterned with lilies. Her long black hair flowed in the breeze. She held a lantern, its light soft and warm. But her eyesure eyes were full of quiet sorrow. Aiko reached out. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she knelt at the water's edge, lowering her lantern gently onto the lake's surface. When she released it, Aiko felt something, a rush of emotion. A longing so deep and gentle that it felt like a lullaby. The lantern drifted away. The woman watched it for a long moment, then whispered something Aiko could not fully hear, soft, trembling words carried on a breath of wind. But one word reached her clearly. "Remember." The vision blurred. The lake shimmered, and the world dissolved once more into silver light. Aiko gasped as she opened her eyes. The lake was before her again. The lilies swayed softly. The special lantern floated calmly in its place. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her heartbeat felt distant, like it belonged to the memory she had witnessed. Shinji crouched beside her, voice low. "You saw something." Aiko nodded slowly. A woman by the lake, she was sad. And her lantern carried so much tenderness. Shinji's eyes were calm and deep. She was part of the lake's memory. Aiko swallowed. "But why show it to me?" Haru placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "Because the lake wants you to understand something. Something it cannot say with words." Aiko looked out over the water, still shimmering faintly as though the memory lingered beneath the surface. What was her wish? She whispered. Shinji and Haru exchanged a thoughtful glance. "That," Shinji said softly, "is what we must discover." Aiko hugged her knees gently, letting the quiet night settle around her. For the first time, she understood. The lake not only wants to be heard. It wanted to be remembered. And something within its depths was guiding her toward a story waiting to rise. Chapter 7 Whisper of the Forgotten Lantern. Night had fully settled over Lake Biwa, wrapping the world in a cool velvet hush. The stars shimmered faintly above, their reflections trembling on the lake's surface like scattered grains of light. After the vision, Aiko remained seated on the dock, her thoughts floating slowly weightless, like lanterns set adrift on calm waters. The memory she had witnessed still clung to her like a delicate mist. The woman in the ancient kimono, the soft lantern gliding across the lake, the single whispered word. "Remember." Aiko closed her eyes, replaying it gently, as if she might discover something new each time. Shinji stood nearby, gazing out over the water with a thoughtful expression. Haru sat beside Aiko, his warm presence grounding her. After a long, peaceful silence, Haru spoke. "Aiko, when you saw her, did it feel as though she was looking for something?" Aiko nodded slowly. "Not something. Someone. Or maybe waiting?" Shinji turned his head slightly. That would make sense. Lanterns were once offerings, prayers drifting across water. Some carried messages of love, others memories of those lost. Aiko hugged her arms lightly around herself. But hers felt different. She wasn't letting go of something. It felt like she was leaving something behind. A wish, maybe. Shinji's eyes glimmered beneath the starlight. Then the lake may be asking you to fulfill that wish. Aiko blinked. Me? But why me? Shinji didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath, letting the night wind move through his robes. "Some people," he said gently, "carry a quiet resonance that the lake recognizes. A harmony. The water hears the heart. And sometimes the heart hears it back." Aiko felt her cheeks warm slightly, though she wasn't sure why. Haru smiled. "It's true. From the moment you arrived, the lilies opened for you faster than they do for most." Aiko laughed softly, embarrassed. That's not possible. But even as she said it, she remembered the way the lilies had parted when her fingers touched the water. The way the lantern's light had responded to her presence. And the way the lake had shown her a memory without a single word. Perhaps it was possible. A gentle breeze stirred, rippling across the surface. The lantern among the lilies flickered once soft, playful, almost like a beckoning gesture. Aiko leaned forward. "The lantern, it feels like it's trying to tell me something." Shinji stepped closer, his voice low. "If it is, then the next step is to listen." Aiko looked up. "How?" Shinji knelt beside her and placed both palms on the wooden dock. "The lake listens in silence. It answers in stillness. So we must quiet our thoughts until we can feel its voice." Aiko nodded. She straightened her posture and closed her eyes. Haru placed a comforting hand on her back. Shinji began to guide her. "Breathe in. Slowly. Feel the cool air entering your chest." Aiko inhaled, the night air carrying the scent of lilies and distant cedar trees. "And breathe out," Shinji whispered. "Let the noise of the day drift away, like a lantern pushed gently into the current." Aiko exhaled, letting her mind soften. "Listen," Shinji murmured. "Not with your ears. With the quiet within." Aiko listened. The lake's gentle lap against the dock. A distant cicada is calling softly. The subtle rustle of reeds swaying in the wind. And beneath it all a softness. A pulse. A shimmering, delicate presence that felt like it was moving toward her. Aiko's breath caught. She felt it, a thread of sensation touching her thoughts, warmer than the air, brighter than the moonlight. Like a hand made of light brushing her cheek. She whispered without opening her eyes, "I can feel it." Shinji's voice remained soft. "Let it show you what you need to see." The warmth deepened. Aiko leaned into the feeling, letting it wrap around her like an embrace. And then, a sound. So faint she might have imagined it. Like the echo of a voice carried on a breeze. A woman's voice. Gentle. Familiar in a way she could not explain. Find what was left behind. Aiko's eyes opened softly. The lantern on the lake had changed. Its blue glow was brighter, steadier, as though awakened. The lilies around it seemed to lean inward, forming a ring. Haru gasped quietly. "Aiko, it's reacting to you." Aiko stood slowly, her legs tingling from kneeling. She stepped to the edge of the dock, looking down at the shimmering circle of lilies. "What was left behind?" she whispered. The woman in the memory. She placed her lantern on the water and whispered something. Haru rose beside her. And maybe the lake kept that wish safe, waiting for the right person to come. Aiko touched her chest. "But what am I supposed to find?" Shinji tapped his wooden staff lightly against the dock. The sound was soft, almost reverent. "Whatever it is," he said, "it lies beneath the surface. The lake is ready to show you. But remember, water reveals itself slowly. You must be patient." Aiko gazed at the glowing lantern. It pulsed gently, each flicker syncing with her heartbeat, as if encouraging her closer. Without realizing it, she smiled faintly. A peaceful, curious warmth spread through her. "Then I'll follow the lantern," she said. The words felt right, as if the lake had been waiting for her to speak them aloud. Haru nodded. "And we'll follow you." Shinji closed his eyes in solemn agreement. The night is long, and the lake has many memories waiting to rise. Stay quiet, stay gentle, and it will guide you. Aiko gazed once more at the lantern floating in the cradle of lilies. Somewhere beneath those peaceful waters, a forgotten wish slept, waiting for her to bring it back to the surface. And she knew, tonight was only the beginning. Chapter 8. Beneath the lilies' moonlit veil. A veil of mist drifted silently across Lake Biwa as the moon climbed higher. Its pale glow wrapped the water in silver, softening the horizon until lake and sky seemed to melt into one gentle dream. Aiko felt the cool night air brush against her cheeks as she stepped down from the dock. Shinji and Haru followed close behind, their lanterns casting warm orbs of light that flickered like small, steady hearts. The glowing lake lantern, the one that had awakened, floated a little farther from the shore now, as though guiding them to a quieter part of the water. Aiko watched it carefully. "It's drifting with intention." Haru nodded. "Like it wants to lead you somewhere." Shinji tapped his staff lightly, sending a small echo through the still night. "There is a place beneath the lilies," he said softly, "where the lake's memories gather. A quiet hollow, a cradle for lost wishes." Aiko felt a gentle pull inside her chest. "Is that where we're going?" "If the lantern wishes it," Shinji answered. They walked along a narrow path, tracing the lake's edge. The reeds rustled softly, parting as though welcoming them. Fireflies rose from the grass, swirling around Aiko with warm green glimmers that reminded her of breathy laughter. The drifting lantern slowed near a thicket of willow trees. Their long branches swayed, touching the surface of the water like fingertips. Aiko stepped forward. "This place feels different." It did. The air was thicker, warmer, as though it held something sacred. Shinji lowered his voice. "It's quiet here because the lake listens more closely." Aiko knelt at the water's edge. Her reflection wavered softly beside the lantern's glowing shape. Haru crouched next to her. "The lilies here are unusual." Aiko looked closer. He was right. These lilies were larger, with petals a soft bluish white, glowing faintly as though reflecting moonlight from within. The pattern of their veins resembled delicate writing, curving lines reminiscent of old calligraphy. Aiko touched one carefully. It shivered beneath her fingers, like a small sigh. Shinji joined them, kneeling on the soft earth. "These bloom only in the presence of an untended wish." Aiko's breath caught. "A wish but left alone?" Shinji nodded. "Some wishes are whispered to lakes because they cannot be spoken to another person. Those are tender, fragile and easily forgotten. But the lake remembers what people do not." Aiko stared at the lilies, feeling something stir deep within her, an ache, gentle but unmistakable. She spoke softly. The woman from the vision, her eyes were full of something she couldn't say. Maybe her wish was left behind here. Shinji did not answer directly. But his silence was a confirmation. The lantern floated closer to Aiko's knees. It pulsed once, twice, not like ordinary light, but like a heartbeat. Aiko felt her own heart match it for a moment. And then the water beneath the lilies began to glow. Subtle at first, just a faint shimmer, but quickly deepening into ribbons of silver that wove through the dark water like strands of moonlit silk. Aiko leaned instinctively over the surface. "What is happening?" Haru whispered. "The lake is opening." The lilies slowly parted, revealing a darkened pool beneath them, a circle of water untouched by ripples, calm as glass. Aiko felt pulled toward it. Not physically, emotionally, as if a voice was calling her name in a language made of memory. She whispered, "It's asking me to look." Shinji placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Then look with a quiet heart." Aiko inhaled softly and bent closer. The water deepened in color until it became clear, so clear it reflected not her face but something beneath. A faint, glowing outline. Aiko's breath caught. She leaned closer. There, resting gently at the bottom of the lake, was a small wooden box. Old, weathered, wrapped with a single silk cord that moved gently in the current like a sleeping ribbon of light. Aiko whispered, "A box left beneath the lilies." Haru swallowed. Was it hers? Aiko nodded slowly. "I think so." The woman from the vision. She placed her lantern on the water. She whispered a wish. But maybe she left this behind. Shinji studied the glowing pool. "The lake is showing it to you because it wants you to bring it back." Aiko stared at the box. It felt like looking at the past itself, quiet, fragile, trembling with longing. "What should I do?" she whispered. Shinji's voice was calm. "It will rise when you are ready." Aiko reached a hand toward the water. The surface shimmered around her fingertips. The lilies leaned inward, glowing brighter. The lantern pulsed warmly once, twice. And then the water beneath parted. Softly, gracefully, as though guided by unseen hands. The wooden box began to rise. Slowly, ever so slowly. Aiko held her breath as it emerged, dripping silver light like tears of the moon. When it reached her palms, it was warm. Unexpectedly warm, as if held only moments ago by gentle human hands instead of resting beneath a lake for generations. Aiko pulled it to her chest. The silk cord gleamed faintly, its strands whispering against one another like threads of memory. She closed her eyes and listened. A faint echo, a voice. Find what was left behind. Haru touched Aiko's arm gently. What does it feel like? Aiko swallowed. It feels like it belongs to someone who didn't want to forget but had to let go. Shinji nodded solemnly. Then your task is clear. You must open it. Aiko cradled the box carefully, holding it as if it were made of breath. She stood. The lantern drifted to her feet. The lilies glowed in a circle around her, like a quiet audience of light. Aiko inhaled. Her fingers brushed the silk cord. And slowly, very slowly, she began to untie it. Chapter 9: The Hidden Wish. The lanterns had dimmed slightly as night deepened, leaving the lake in a serene silver glow. Aiko stood on the wooden dock, holding the wooden box she had retrieved from beneath the lilies. Its surface was worn smooth, and the faint scent of lotus and cedar drifted from it, mingling with the cool night air. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness around her. Shinji and Haru remained close, their presence steady and comforting. The water reflected their soft silhouettes, the floating lantern, and the glowing lilies, creating a scene that felt suspended between dream and reality. Aiko took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the silk cord. "Are you ready?" Shinji asked, his voice a murmur. Aiko nodded, her eyes fixed on the box. She untied the cord slowly, savoring each movement as if she were unwrapping a delicate memory. The lid lifted easily, revealing its contents, a small collection of folded papers, each inscribed with faint brush strokes. Aiko carefully picked one up. The paper was fragile, almost translucent, and the ink shimmered softly under the moonlight. She unfolded it with reverence. The words were not ordinary, they were simple yet filled with profound tenderness. "To whoever finds this, please carry my hope forward. Even if I cannot be here, may this light reach those who need it." Aiko's chest tightened. She glanced at Haru, whose eyes were moist with quiet emotion. "The woman she wanted someone to remember her," Aiko whispered. "And to pass it on." Shinji nodded, kneeling beside her. Her voice lingered in the lake because it was too precious to vanish. It waited for a heart willing to hear it. Aiko picked up another sheet. Each one contained small sketches of lanterns floating on the water, lilies, and moonlit waves. They were accompanied by short, gentle messages, simple wishes for peace, safety, and quiet happiness. "They're her wishes," Aiko said softly. "All of them. She left them here for the lake to keep until someone could find them." Haru smiled faintly. "And now you have found them." Aiko's gaze shifted to the glowing lantern and the lilies encircling it. The water shimmered as if acknowledging her understanding. The lake's gentle pulse seemed to sync with her own heartbeat. I want to send them back," Aiko said, her voice steady. "Back to the world. So they aren't forgotten." Shinji's expression was calm but approving. "Then the next step is to release them carefully. Let the lake help you guide their light." Aiko stood, carrying the papers in her hands. She approached the glowing lantern, feeling its warmth beneath her fingers. One by one, she set the small folded wishes onto the water, each catching the soft glow of the lantern. The moment each paper touched the lake, it shimmered, then drifted gracefully among the lilies and floating lanterns. It was as though the water cradled each wish, carrying it gently forward, letting the hopes ripple outward like soft, unbroken waves. Aiko felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were not sorrowful, they were tender, warm, and filled with quiet joy. Each paper represented a hope that could now journey onward, touching hearts in ways she could not yet imagine. Haru placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The lake trusts you. You are carrying more than the wishes of one life, you are carrying its memory. Aiko looked at Shinji. Will she know that someone is keeping her wishes alive? Shinji's gaze rested on the floating papers and the soft glimmer of the lanterns. Somewhere, beyond the reach of time, she will feel it. The lake will carry her hope far and wide. Aiko knelt by the water, watching as the last paper drifted into the lily's gentle embrace. She inhaled the night air, letting the soft coolness fill her lungs and calm her mind. For a long while, there was only the gentle hum of water, the whisper of reeds, and the quiet pulsing of the lantern's glow. Aiko leaned back, letting her hands rest in her lap. Her heart was full, heavy with tenderness yet light with understanding. The lake, the lantern, the lilies, all of it seemed to sigh with satisfaction. Shinji's voice broke the silence. The lake has shared its secret. You have listened. You have remembered. And in doing so you have given life to its hidden wish. Aiko looked at the water, at the shimmering reflections of the stars above, and felt a deep sense of connection. She could feel the woman's gentle, patient presence, as if watching with a quiet smile from somewhere just beyond the silver waves. The night stretched peacefully, the glow of the lanterns and the floating wishes mingling with the moonlight. The lake whispered against the dock, a lullaby carried on ripples and wind. And in that moment, Aiko understood something essential. Sometimes, the quietest voices hold the most important messages. And sometimes, all it takes to honor them is to listen and let their light drift back into the world. Chapter 10: The Morning of Peace. The first light of dawn brushed the surface of Lake Biwa, turning the water into a smooth sheet of gold and rose. Mist hovered softly above the lake, curling like gentle smoke around the reeds and lilies. The world felt slow, quiet, and utterly serene. Aiko walked along the dock, her bare feet brushing the cool wood. The special lantern rested near the lilies, its pale blue glow now subdued by the growing sunlight. Around it, the floating wishes from the previous night drifted calmly, catching the morning light and scattering tiny reflections across the water. She paused and inhaled deeply. The air was warm, scented with lotus blossoms, earth, and the faint memory of the lake itself. Her heart felt full, as if it had absorbed the quiet wisdom of the night. Haru appeared beside her, carrying a small basket for the lantern. He smiled softly. "The lake is at peace," he said. "And so are its wishes." Aiko nodded. "I feel like the woman from the memory is smiling too." Shinji came up behind them, his eyes reflecting the calm water. "She is," he said gently. "The lake holds her gratitude, and now her hopes will continue with each gentle ripple, each drifting lantern." Aiko knelt near the water, watching as a light breeze carried one of the folded papers slightly farther across the lake. It floated with effortless grace, joining the slow procession of floating wishes that glimmered in the morning light. She felt a deep sense of stillness settle over her. The lake, the lilies, the lanterns, and the hidden wishes had become part of her heart. The quiet voices she had heard, the gentle ripples and glimmers of light, and the unseen presence beneath the water, all of it lingered in a perfect, calming harmony. Haru placed the special lantern into the basket and offered it to her. "This can rest now," he said. "The lake has done its part, and you have done yours." Aiko held the lantern gently, feeling the warmth that remained from the night. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me how to listen." Shinji rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Listening is the first step," he said. "And remembering is the next. You have done both." The sun rose higher, spreading warm gold across the lake and illuminating the surrounding mountains. Aiko watched as her own reflection shimmered alongside the lanterns, the lilies, and the floating wishes. Everything felt connected: the past, the present, the water, and the sky. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the lake's gentle rhythm sink into her heart. In that stillness, she felt an unspoken promise that peace, like light on water, could travel slowly, quietly, and endlessly. Aiko opened her eyes and smiled softly. The lake stretched before her, calm and radiant, and she knew that no matter how many nights passed, its whisper would always be there, quiet, patient, and full of gentle hope. She turned toward the path that led back to the village, carrying the lantern in her hands. Haru and Shinji followed silently, the morning air, golden and fragrant, wrapped around them like a soft blanket. The lake, calm and infinite, shimmered behind them, holding its secrets and memories like a lullaby meant to last forever. And for the first time in a long while, Aiko felt completely at peace. The lake's whispers had been heard. The wishes had been remembered. And the gentle journey of light across the water would continue, endless, serene, and beautiful.